realized that there was just so much prejudice, meaning prejudging, against an Atkins or high-fat diet, that nobody looked beyond just the word. Yeah, well, her story is that she said to Dr. Atkins, "I don't want to work for you because I found out who you were." And he said, "Okay, you're hired." So of all the kind of egregious things that have happened, outpatient doctors have given up diet. Medical schools have given up teaching about diet. Hospitals use the wrong diet. He basically said, don't worry about the muscle loss. The next generation of shots will have a drug in it to prevent the muscle loss. I think this is not a sigh, it's a, oh my gosh.
Tell me who you are and what you do.
I'm Dr. Eric Westman, and I'm an associate professor of medicine at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. I see patients in a medical clinic, now called the Keto Medicine Clinic, and I have a great life. I really practice the best internal medicine of my life, and that's just by changing the food.
And you're also a YouTuber as well.
Well, the YouTube thing, there seemed to be a niche for sticking up for my people, my tribe. So I have these patients who come in saying, well, I saw so-and-so on YouTube saying thus and such. And so my company that I ended up helping to start to get more information to those people who can't make it to the clinic had the idea, well, let's do a YouTube channel to get more information out there. And the upshot is that I am now kind of doing these reacts videos with funny thumbnails that my patients who are my age, kind of roll their eyes to. But the popularity is great because I think last month or so the total views were up to like 1 million for a month.
Wow.
Which is not typical for a practicing doctor. But then I had done research on the low-carb keto diet and able to use that research to start my clinical practice. So because it's kind of an unusual sort of technique for an internal medicine doctor, I think the YouTube channel has done well. Most doctors don't talk about food, but food is really so important and so therapeutic and preventative that I'm happy. I hope that grows, the YouTube channel. And in my patient practice, what I've noticed, they'll say, I saw you on TV. So people come in having watched me and then come to my office. And I'll say, well, but no, I'm on your TV, but it's YouTube. But most of my patients don't have network or cable TV anymore. So they're just watching YouTube all day long. And so they're kind of getting the idea that I'm on network TV, which I'm not. I mean, I see that as it used to be such a huge hurdle to get into that realm.
I mean, that's the network TV of this era for sure.
Well, and the idea that it would be easy to get in and then the viewers would be able to, by popularity, allow those who are popular to grow is a great idea. And yet still a doctor internist who talks about food is kind of an anomaly. I mean, so I have to acknowledge that what I do is not typical, but it's great. It works so well. But
it's true. A lot of the doctors on YouTube are not as actively practicing as someone like yourself.
Right. So you always want to consider the source of where the YouTube information is coming from. And most doctors are still in the old paradigm of using medicines. In fact, there's some who are just staunchly sticking up for medicines, saying that people like me are crazy and they obviously haven't read the science and kept up with it. But the other popular ones that I've seen and reacted to are just kind of, they're trained as physicians, maybe even PhDs and they're not practicing, which, as you know, the grassroots practice of any profession, including medicine, teaches you so much that this goes way beyond just the book learning that most doctors get.
I mean, obviously, I'm not myself a physician, not a medical professional.
Oh, I get that a lot.
Oh, yeah.
That study just came out. Oh, yeah, who did it? Oh, Dave Feldman.
Right. But
No, but you collaborated with the world's expert.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, yeah.
But how I came into this space was being at the ground level, was doing these experiments on myself.
I'll never forget
Yeah.
when you came to me showing me multiple cholesterol levels throughout the day. And you said, look what I found. I kind of looked at you like, I don't know what you're doing, but keep doing it, because we weren't taught that the cholesterol would go up and down. We were just taught that cholesterol was bad. Cholesterol was bad, and that it's
glacial. Like, it can
Right,
change,
doesn't
but it can
change.
take months. Just give it time.
Yeah, in fact, if those who started the cholesterol story back in the 70s and 80s and all that, if they knew it was this dynamic, that's kind of a scandal. I mean, it's kind of you wouldn't just base everything on something that's so changeable, I think, but we can get into that later.
Yeah. Well, I definitely want to embarrass you a little bit real quick, in that while you are presenting yourself as just a clinician, I like to say you're the OG. There are very few people who actually were there from well before keto was what it was, well before low carb, high fat, even before things like paleo, etc.
Yeah, but now you're saying how old I am.
But you're not that old. Just that when Atkins was big, over multiple eras, you literally were coming up to Atkins and you were saying, this is great. Your book is great. You want to get published, though. You want to get the research. You were that guy, right?
Yeah, well, there were two of us right about the same time. Jeff Volek, who is a PhD, who has done great research at Ohio State. At the same time, we both approached Dr. Atkins for research money. And for me, it was two of my patients who lost over 50 pounds on their own. I was working at the VA hospital in Durham as an ambulatory care doctor and as a clinical trialist doing studies on smoking cessation. And I have to say, one of the great things about the medical research world, most practices, they make you stay in the clinic. So you'll see a doctor who's a researcher, but they also have a clinic, and that's kind of unique in medicine, I think. So I'm seeing these patients, they lose over 50 pounds, and one of them kind of embarrasses me. He says, I did the Atkins diet. All I did is eat steak and eggs. And I kind of was like, well, what's that? And so I was drubbed into reading the books and then said, I don't think this is good for you. Mind you, this is 1998. Okay, so 27 years ago now. And I read the papers and talked to my friends, and that your cholesterol is going to go up. And one of my patients, you have to imagine these are all Vietnam vets mainly. I had a few World War II veterans at the VA, and they just kind of looked at me and said, well, why don't you measure my cholesterol if you're worried about it? And I thought, well, it's just down the hall. And so we measure the cholesterol, and it goes down. The bad one goes down, the good one goes just the way you would want it. So I'm thinking, if
just to clarify, LDL goes down, especially for somebody who's much more
it went
overweight.
down. Yeah.
It went down in spite of consuming a huge amount of saturated fat in these very overweight patients.
Yeah.
And they're losing weight, and yet not only does the LDL go down, but the quote-unquote good cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, tends to go up.
So that's the old language, the good and the bad cholesterol. Well, I was trained in that. This is what I believed. And so, 2 in a row, well, you can tell me the odds of this being in Las Vegas. And I kind of knew a little bit of statistics and know how to roll dice, and that if something never happened and you saw it, it happened, right? So that's the first thing. Lightning can strike. So the LDL, it could go down randomly. But 2 in a row, The LDL goes down. Everyone else says it's going to go up. And so most people, even today, if they're losing weight, the LDL, the bad, will go down. But the odds, if the LDL had gone up probably in one of those patients, I wouldn't have continued.
Right, you would have zeroed in on it.
I would have said, oh no. But what I did is I called my nutrition and obesity expert who I had in training. So I wasn't so far out of residency. I called him. He was Jim Anderson at the University of Kentucky, and he was into the oat bran, wrote books on using oat bran to lower cholesterol, kind of the old idea of that. And I remember, and he said, well, I'm not a big, I said, should I study the Atkins diet? 2 of my patients had this effect. And he said, well, it's not my favorite diet, he said, but it's a balanced diet. So a teacher of mine who I trusted said it's a balanced diet, meaning you get all the nutrition you need. It's not balanced in terms of bread and food groups. I mean, that's a construct of the U.S. government.
But that's usually what we think of when we think of balanced diet.
No. But so I knew Jim Anderson. He was a scientist, and he said, no, it's a balanced diet. It's not my favorite one, though. Kind of hinting toward it might be bad. I mean, everyone said it was bad. In fact, one of the dietitians complained to the hospital director to close down my first study. But the research committee didn't close it down. They just made me file more reports, that I wasn't killing anyone every month. So I thought, well, first travel around, visit doctors who were using it, and then do studies of my own. And Jeff Wolick and I asked Dr. Atkins for research money. This is not, it was, I kind of knew, I didn't know how controversial it was, but I kind of knew the impact that it could have. So I have all this documented in spreadsheets, and the timing of when I went to see people. And then the BBC did a documentary on the Atkins diet.
What year was this?
This is going to be 2004-ish. Because Dr. Atkins had died in 2003. And so Gary Foster, who was a researcher at the time, he then went to work with Weight Watchers, and he's playing basketball in the gym in this documentary film. I'm running around the track at Duke where, I'm not really a runner, but I had to show I was fit the model of someone being, fit that model. And the studies were positive, and then at the end, they end with but Dr. Atkins died, and there was this pediatrician who thought it was going to be terrible.
But Dr. Atkins died from slipping on ice, I believe.
Of course. He slipped on the ice in New York City. It was a freak snowstorm right around Easter. I think it was Holy Week.
Yeah, he was of a more advanced age, so of course a slip and hitting your head is, I guess.
I think he was early 70s. I think.
Yeah.
And I know the doctor who found him on the sidewalk. It was the doctor who was working with him, Dr. Keith Berkowitz, who picked up a lot of the practice that Dr. Atkins had at the time. But we were on the verge of our second study, the randomized trial that was in the Annals of Internal Medicine in 2004. And Dr. Atkins never saw it published, but he knew that the results were going to be good. But he didn't recover from the bleed into his brain after that fall. Of course, then the whole diet doctor dies obese. There was a doctor who turns out to be a vegan proponent who got Dr. Atkins' death certificate surreptitiously, called and said, I'm a doctor, I need it. They're not supposed to send out death certificates. And so they published his weight, after he had been pumped with fluids and in the ICU for a week or two. And that went around the world. Diet doctor dies obese. So I knew Mrs. Atkins at the time. He had married late in life, and she actually came around after Dr. Atkins died and endowed, I think, 7 professorships at U.S. universities, and the powers that be at Duke didn't think that I was worthy of the professorship, even though Dr. or Mrs. Atkins was in the room with the dean and like this. I was with them, and she said, I want this professorship to go to Dr. Westman. Well, it didn't happen. And she never came back. So why did I stay? I think, well, Duke has a history of diets. The rice diet started at Duke in the 1930s. And the story is fascinating. It was a European doctor who came with a thick accent. He was treating someone for high blood pressure. And the high blood pressure, there were no drugs at the time. So this patient goes away and comes back having fixed her extremely high blood pressure. He was just kind of shocked. So he said, what did you do? And she said, well, I did what you told me. And he said, well, this isn't typical. Must have thought, well, what did I tell you? Meaning, what did you hear? Because of his thick accent. It turns out she just went out and ate rice, just rice. And it keeps the salt so low that the blood pressure just plummets, and it was reversing hypertension. So Duke uses that now used to use it for weight loss. In fact, Duke has the history of several residential weight loss programs, and I worked at one right around our early research time, right at the early 2000s, called the Duke Diet and Fitness Center, and people had come from all around to lose weight. That's what really got me into the idea that that I could see the reversal of diabetes, of hypertension, of obesity, all these other problems. The method they used wasn't keto or wasn't low carb, but just low calorie with exercise and bringing people out of their home to a dose of Durham, which is pretty sleepy kind of town compared to New York City. So that's what got me interested in obesity medicine and changing my career to from really I was a smoking cessation clinical trialist at the VA, and then moving toward an obesity medicine practice. But we didn't change it to a keto practice until we did our research after about 8 years of research. So, and now that 8 years is 1 or 2 studies, right? So,
right.
Yeah, it takes a long time. But
I mean, we founded the Citizen Science Foundation in 2019, and
yeah.
I'm all thinking, I'll just raise the money.
Be a couple of years, fix it.
Yeah,
well, that's what I thought.
We could have it in hand.
I thought we'll do a few studies. There'll be no more obesity. I mean, my patients, they did it on their own.
Yeah.
They read the Atkins diet book. But, I thank you for having me to talk about this. It's given me a chance to kind of think through some pivotal moments. I don't know why, but the American Heart Association in Chicago asked me to be on a press panel, the press release panel, where you would be in front of the big podium and all these reporters are out there. And it was just our 50 patient study. No, I'm sorry, that was the randomized control trial, the one that ended up in the Annals of Internal Medicine. But I remember a reporter coming up to me saying, well, you're studying the Atkins diet. I said, well, yeah. And he said, well, millions of people have done the Atkins diet. And I looked at him and I said, well, millions of books have been sold. It doesn't mean everyone's doing it. And then he kind of knew, oh, well, maybe this guy isn't just a shill for it, So that's always been my tack, is to be honest about not everyone's doing it, even though they read a book. And then my routine comment when I went to research meetings is, tell me I shouldn't study this. Tell me something that is bad. And so I went to the Obesity Society meetings for 10 years saying, to the people who I got to know, and they said, well, no, we can't tell you. In fact, it got irritating. I think I became an irritant because I would keep saying, tell me not to. I can't tell you not to study it, Eric. Well, and then I would go to the next question. Why aren't you studying it? But they couldn't wrap their head around giving people so much fat in the food. There was a taboo on studying these kinds of diets, which is fascinating. There's still a fear of that lingering in some subpopulations.
Yeah, saturated fat is thought to this day to be pathogenic, that it's disease-causing, that it's
Well, you can read
clogging
hundreds of
arteries.
articles that say it.
Yeah. And it is
It doesn't mean it's true.
it is funny because I was just like you in those earliest days where you're reading about it and you're saying this sounds completely ridiculous. A diet that's just going to be full of fatty meats and cheeses, and I'm going to intentionally not have fruits, for example. Like there's getting back to the balanced diet. This sounds
Right.
like a very myopic diet where it's just very narrow. And yeah, I do love the meat. I love eating the meat, but as I understood it, the meat's a problem, especially red meat. I've got to try to keep the red meat down. And so I'm doing the same thing 10 years ago. I'm going, yeah, but what about the cholesterol? I mean, the cholesterol kind of cuts this off entirely. Sure, this might be good for the weight loss and so forth, but I mean, if I'm getting all of this, especially dietary cholesterol, that seems crazy to adopt this diet. But I was getting more and more overweight, and my A1C was climbing. And this was what I kept seeing in the diabetic forums. They were saying low carb. And it was in counter to these major institutions that were going, no, you need to have carbs in every meal, in fact. As much as 60 grams of carbs per every meal. So it was weird.
Well, kind of first do no harm for me. If I'm going to study this, I had to convince myself that organizations and reputable places didn't think you had to have carbs, despite everyone thinking they need carbs. So actually, the Institute of Medicine, which is one of the only unbiased sources of information, even back then had a nice section on carbohydrates saying that they're not essential, meaning you don't need to eat carbohydrate. And of course, nobody cited it or nobody would even say, well, what a great source. They would quote the American Heart Association that said, you need carbs and you can't have fat. But I wanted to be sure I wasn't harming anybody. That was important to me, and getting that cinched down in my mind was really important. Of course, this was before hunter-gatherer, paleo, primal, all kind of, people weren't eating carbs until relatively recently. But so I really came at this with let me test this like a drug. It seems to have drug-like effects. So what would I do? I would start doing randomized trials. We did a few at Duke, and then they were replicated all over the world where the weight loss happened. In most cases, the LDL didn't change on average, which, of course, is kind of a funny thing where doctors will say, well, the LDL will go up. No, it didn't go up on average. Oh, well, okay. Although it did go up for some people. It went down for the others. The average didn't change. Most doctors aren't too savvy about data.
Well, we're now published on this. The amazing work of Dr. Adrian Sotomoda in thinking of this idea. Hey, there's now enough randomized controlled trials where there's a keto naive arm, or at least a low carb naive arm, as in people who've never been on it before. It's great because it's an RCT. We could go ahead and analyze this against BMI. And that the present lipid energy model we're published on would say, well, if your BMI of, say, less than 25, then how much you restrict the carbohydrates should be relevant with regard to how low your BMI is. Lower BMI, the higher your cholesterol. That's the place of concern with regard to cholesterol going up. But in the same paper, because we also had all these RCTs, you saw the opposite, especially the higher your weight was. So if your BMI between 25 and 35, then your LDL typically went down. And if it was between 35 and 25, I meant 35 to 45, your LDL typically went down. 25 to 35, it typically didn't move much, usually stayed effectively the same. So while some people might see their LDL go up a little, they might see it go down a little, it varied. But as far as just anticipating that it was just going to climb like crazy, that ended up being a new phenomenon. And I try to bring this up and point this out to people all the time. The reason this wasn't coming up as much in the Atkins era is because it seemed so crazy to take on a diet where you would just be eating, pounding down saturated fat and so forth. But it worked great for people who just, they needed to try something. all of these other, usually Atkins was like a late decision where they'd already tried all these other kinds of diets. They weren't working, and then they did this one. But there weren't at that time, and really only until like the last 10 years, would you actually have people metabolically healthy choose to restrict their carbohydrates. And therefore, suddenly we see this expansion of people who are lean and metabolically healthy where their LDL goes through the roof. That's the fascinating piece to this story.
Yeah. So, even today, though, doctors in my area assume the cholesterol in the blood will go up if you do a Atkins or keto diet. They just assume that'll happen. And it doesn't always happen, right? They'll assume that the coronaries will be slathered with your LDL being up to 590, and your group's paper that just came out this week said that that's not always the case, right? So there's if you say a blanket statement about LDL, no, there's an anomaly, right? So the same kind of thing with just assuming. I finally realized that there was just so much prejudice, meaning prejudging, against an Atkins or high-fat diet that nobody looked beyond just the word. So today I coach my patients to say you're doing a Mediterranean diet because that has the valence of, well, that's good. And even doctors don't know what a Mediterranean diet is, but you're doing a lower carb, lower sugar version of a Mediterranean diet. That's really what it is.
Fair. You got a lot of things like salmon and chicken, and I liked how Gary Taubes said it in one of his talks. Gary Taubes, by the way, I've also had on, so it's another OG. But just a lot of times it's the framing, instead of saying I'm on a keto diet, saying, oh, I don't like to eat carbs because they make me fat. It just seems so simple, but to like a physician, oh, okay, well, this is, establishing a relationship that I try not to eat as many carbs. Is not so specific. The other challenge is the keto diet, I feel, is the terminology has been a bit stretched. To actually get to a state of ketosis, usually you're restricting carbs quite a bit. And it is worth emphasizing this difference between keto and low carb. Low carb is this broader spectrum where, and I like the original diet doctors, cut points of around 100 to 120 grams of carbs or less. It's actually not that hard to hit a low-carb diet. A keto diet, you're probably working at it a lot. You're probably being more mindful of really not having, bread, pasta, rice, even in small amounts. You're very mindful and deliberate about just really keeping those carbs down. One thing that I have to say, you've been an advocate this whole time about, that I only recently signed on to and wish I'd signed on to it a long time before, is looking at total carbs as opposed to looking at net carbs. Net carbs became a way for family members of mine who are challenge cases, in my opinion, to actually end up eating more carbs than they would have otherwise. That if I just kept them
Not just your family.
Yeah, if I just kept them on total carbs from the get-go, I think it would have been a bit better. Could you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, and I did worked on a book that kind of perpetuated or brought up the whole net carbs thing.
Do you have that book with you by chance?
No, but it's on my bookshelf. That I brought a picture of my bookshelf if we need things to talk about. But the new Atkins book talked about net carbs. But you have to understand that. Well, and end your carb confusion. My solo book uses total carbs. Yeah, so when I visited Dr. Atkins, I went to the office, 4-story flat, Midtown Manhattan. It was the peak of his career. They've been doing it for 30 years. And I sat in Jackie Eberstein's office seeing patients, and then they would go down the hall to see the doctor who, the senior doctor, Dr. Atkins. It was like he was the professor, and in the academic world, that would have been the teaching doctor. You go down and you see him. And it was working, and but it wasn't good enough for me to just learn from him. I had to do my own research. But when I visited the clinic, they didn't use net carbs. I mean, net carbs wasn't a thing. really until the early 2000s.
We should mention what net carbs actually is.
Well, okay, yeah. So net carbs is the calculation you do where you take the total carbs, subtract the fiber, and the sugar alcohols. So you may have a bread that says 0 net carbs. There are a lot of breads now that say 0, or even ice cream and all these junk foods. I think Vinny Tortorich has done a movie on dirty keto, even the junk foods that are out there. So net carbs is the remainder after the fiber and sugar alcohol deduction, under the assumption that they don't get absorbed and they don't affect your metabolism. But when I visited Dr. Atkins, one of the things that stuck out is that he didn't practice like the book said. So the book says you do 20 total grams for 2 weeks, and then you add back carbs. That's not what he did. He kept people at that induction level, the 20 grams per day total, not net, until people reached their goal. Often that was years. So had I not visited, I wouldn't have known. And of course, our studies used that method, which distinguishes it from all the other randomized trials, even studies that were done, because what they did, the other investigators, we're not going to go talk to Dr. Atkins. Oh, we'll read his book. And they studied the Atkins book. So that one of the first studies Gary Foster did, they added back more carbs after 2 weeks. You know how well that worked? You can see it's just a dose reduction. More carbs, less effective. And so net carbs, to me, I try to frame it as like over-the-counter low carb and keto, not prescription strength. So I'm trying to get that into the lexicon that if you want prescription strength, use total carbs. And, 20 or 30. Virta Health, the company, does 30 total.
That's just such great verbiage. I love that.
Well, prescription strength meaning, it
like
can work.
You're a lot more serious. Like you have to be. Like prescription strength, you think of it in terms of like care.
I take people off 10 medicines.
Yeah.
It's prescription strength. So to get off insulin, doing net carbs just isn't going to do it for a lot of people. It might. But, the other sense I got, and I never had a chance to ask Dr. Atkins, as he died before our second study was done, and I didn't have a chance to go and say, okay, teach me. I was still, at a distance doing our own research, but I wanted to know why, he did a few things, and I wasn't able to ask some critical questions, but I've now kind of, after looking through the years, on the method that he used was not only total carbs. That's a big difference from today's prescription strength versus internet over-the-counter strength. But he also limited the fats. So the sheet of paper that I borrowed from him and did our research on has this little section that says there's a limit to cheese, creams and oils, and mayonnaise. And so now also with the benefit of doing a company that has taught thousands of people online, we survey them, what are the differences between what you've learned and what we taught. And what we teach basically works if you do it. It's too strict for some people, but so the total carbs versus net carbs, the limitation on the cheese, creams and oils, mayonnaise, those high ticket items. And I'm not a big fan of bulletproof coffee. I'm not a big fan of adding oils and all this. So what do you say when somebody mentions, hey, I saw this on a YouTube channel. I hear it's great. It's also a way for me to fit my macros, right? That which I don't
basically doesn't count, right?
Well, so I go to visit Dr. Atkins, Dr. Eads, and Rosedale because Dr. Eads had retired by the time I was curious about this, and Dr. Bernstein was in practice, still is today, 1998. And what I learned was 20 grams with this sheet of paper, super strict, until you reach your goal. The diabetes is gone. So if someone comes today, so what I observed is, what about bulletproof coffee, doc? And I'm like, what's bulletproof coffee? So the world kind of changed. I'm here slogging away, doing my job, reversing diabetes, having, getting paid for it, creating my own practice basically from nothing. And that's no small thing, right? Most doctors create a practice based on drugs, really medications today. And so other people would come in saying, oh, it's so hard to do that keto diet because you have to use the app and follow your macros and what percent of fat? And I'm like, where did this come from? So there were all these other new kids on the street. To me, the Christmas tree is keeping the carbs low. Now, these other ornaments, they kind of make it sexy, pretty it up, but it can make it harder for people. So I teach I
heard this phrase: you already have the high fat, you just need the low carbs.
That's a good way to say it. But so even today or recently in my clinic, older couples listening to Steak and Butter Gal, who I've reviewed her. I've never met her, but she only had 10 or 20 pounds to lose, I think, and is really eating sticks of butter. So someone who has diabetes is watching this young person do it her way. It helped her, but she's not losing weight. The older person can't add in. Well, the difference is she already has 100 pounds of fat on her body. So Steve Phinney, remember those ads when E.F. Hutton says? Remember that everyone was like, E.F. Hutton, it was an ad campaign a while ago. When Steve Phinney says, you should perk your ears. But basically now I lost my train of thought.
You're talking about the Steak and Butter Gal, and she's...
Oh, right. The macro counting in an app doesn't take into account the fat that you're burning from your body fat. So you might be adding 10, 15% of your calories for the day from your body fat. It doesn't have to be on your plate. Well, so this macro thing came about when I went back to the origins of the Atkins and protein-sparing modified fast diets. Harvard studied them. They published papers. They were just feeding protein, basically. And so if you just eat protein, your body will burn its own fat. And if you have some fatty acids with your animal-sourced protein, you're not going to get fatty acid deficiency. So basically what's happening now on the internet and the pop culture is recapitulating, going back to the early studies of just eating meat. Have you heard of that? It's called the carnivore diet. Well, it's massively popular in some circles. So
not just some circles, it's getting really big.
Yeah. Now. Of course, that violates all sorts of principles about red meat causing cancer, which I don't think is a relevant issue to worry about, but then also the climate change, and which again I don't think is a relevant issue, but it kind of goes against the pop culture view of eating. But so anyway, the science, you don't have to calculate macros. And what also was blurred through some people's teaching of the low-carb keto diet is they talked about epilepsy. This is not the keto diet for epilepsy. And you can kind of tell if an expert is saying, oh, yeah, well, what we teach started with the epilepsy. No, this started with Banting in England. The Banting diet was a low-carb diet for obesity. And then it was studied by Osler and Allen and Joslin, still the Joslin Clinic at Harvard in Boston. They were using this 100 years ago, not for epilepsy, for diabetes. And the important difference there is you don't have to be super strict about the macros for it to work.
And this is actually the case with, if you look at the original founding doctors for the American Diabetes Association, the instructions, the diet that they had then, I got to see the founder and sort of what he outlined. His name escapes me right now, but it actually holds up pretty close to what the low-carb diet would be today, which is part of why I know this, is because I wasn't a fan of some things that was released, especially last year. Because I was curious how much the ADA, how much has it changed from what it was, or was it always this way? And I can give you an emphatic answer. It has changed from where it started.
And most of the diabetic books are teaching people who have diabetes were low carb in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, and then change.
But to your point, they would see maybe a few, like a general practitioner would maybe see 2 diabetics in their career, right? And so you had to be a specialist, a diabetician, is that what
Diabetologist.
Diabetologist.
Yeah.
And those were rare back then because it was just such a rare disease.
Even heart attacks were rare.
I mean, I think there's a little bit of debate on that because a lot of things would be called old age. You died of old age. So there's some
Or you died of heartburn.
Yeah. But the larger point is diabetes is so much more of a newer phenomenon. It's fascinating to look back to when there wasn't as many of these institutions around that kind of pushed, I guess you could say, the landscape of science in certain directions, where they were just curious scientist doctors. And they would go, it seems like this person has a problem with controlling glucose in their blood. Maybe they should just have less carbohydrates that turn into glucose, since the management within their body seems to be a problem. And here we are today in 2025 going, hey, maybe we should think about this for people who have this exact condition.
The stories are all, and the science, well documented in Gary Taubes' works. I just have to shout out to him that when I was doing my early research, visiting Dr. Atkins and kind of, what the heck am I getting into? Although I knew it worked in the short run. I saw it in my patients and saw it in their patients. Gary wrote Good Calories, Bad Calories, which is a pivotal pioneering book that just shows the stuff we were taught about low-fat diets really wasn't all that sound scientifically. And then just in the last couple of years, he wrote the diabetes history and story, and it's a great read that, yes, all doctors framed diabetes as excess blood sugar, cut the carbs out. And then it gets changed into a treatment thing. And insulin gets used to treat diabetes for both type 1s and type 2s. I mean, this is my condensed version of what he unearthed. So by the time you could measure insulin in the blood for these overweight people with high blood sugars, the insulin was already high. So you didn't need to give these people insulin. In fact, the endocrinology view is if the level is high, you want to lower it. So you should have chosen a treatment that lowered the insulin level, not give more, but it was already in practice.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult to tease that apart.
There's also commonly, back then and into today, there's also commonly this pushback of what do I think my patients would adhere to?
Well,
what do I think they would be willing
I've never
to
seen
do?
it in my practice, right? It is a common thing.
But it's certainly I want to say a broader narrative position, I think, to often fall back to what can I just write on a script to treat them. And I don't mean to say this as though I'm diminishing this care decision, because it's absolutely true. There's challenge cases in my family who they just want to find a way that it can be in the pill box and then solve their problems, right?
Or shots now.
Yeah, or shots.
Yeah.
Just something that can, because they would say, look, this is just a struggle I'm going to continue to have, and I don't want to take the time to address it. So they're out there.
Yeah.
But is that really going to be the entire patient pool of everything, we can all see? Or are we going to have folks like David Unwin talks about, where he just has the patient in, he gives them the choice?
Yeah, well, they ought to be given a choice today. In fact, even if your patients haven't done it on their own, if you, as a doctor, said, why don't you try this, that can be very powerful. And doctors just aren't comfortable talking about food, and they don't understand that you can know what they're eating and drinking by just asking them to fill in a form before you come in the room. And one of the things I say on my YouTube channel is, has a doctor ever asked you what you eat? I mean, like breakfast, lunch, dinner, and write it down and look at it? Doctor's never done that. What? So, well, I think giving people a choice, or even if I have just a minute with doctors, I'll say, look, this has been studied as much as a drug for FDA approval. So you have to pitch it like a drug for FDA approval. Like, would you say, Oh, I see you have this terrible sinusitis. It's giving you a headache. Well, there's this expensive drug. It's a big pill. You got to take it 4 times a day, and it might help your sinusitis. Is anyone going to take that? So the work has been done to be able to say, look, use a simple method, whatever you choose. There are a lot of different methods. Keep it simple is one of the things I've learned that makes it manageable and sustainable in the long run. Don't try to complicate things. Don't use apps and measure ketones and all that. You don't need to do that. But you have to, as a doctor, say, this will work if you do it. I have the confidence that it will work.
And they can often draw on their existing patient pool. They can often say, I just had, a patient in this morning who lost 100 pounds. It took them a while. But
this week in my clinic, I walked around 18 years of diabetes, gone in 2 weeks. And my nurses were all like, okay, Dr. Westman, you're getting a little, out of control. No, it's routine. And yet there's it seems like you're almost crazy when you talk about these things as a doctor, but they're commonplace. But it's growing. There are more doctors who are interested in the diet, and I'm hopeful that the current fanaticism about the drugs will create an opening for, well, what are you going to do then? And have people at least be offered some sort of diet as an off-ramp from these drugs. Anyway, the idea that it's hard and my patients can't do it, well, partially, doctors, is because you didn't tell them. You didn't, or some doctors come in like a hammer and say, you got to eat less. And that's all they say. And so the patients come to me and say, but he didn't tell me what to do. And so, the style matters. So I got into the obesity medicine field, actually kind of pulled in because of the research I was doing. And I've learned from other doctors who have used obesity medicine as a tool. I've learned so much from these doctors and friends through the years that they actually put me into the leadership, and I'm past president of that organization. Although most of these doctors now, like you said, they're prescribing drugs. Even the obesity medicine doctors, I'm afraid, because it's a higher volume thing. You can treat more people, and more people want the shots. Even to the point of one of my friends from the organization, I said, well, you're looking pretty good. And we're talking, I'm still using the keto diet. In fact, I changed my clinic to the Keto Medicine Clinic. This is to another doctor friend of mine. And she, don't remember, said, well, that keto, it's so passé. It's just, it's kind of come and gone. I said, well, what do you mean? I'm still using it. And I looked at it, you're on the shot, aren't you? And basically the comment was, I want my bagel in the morning. So even with doctors who are the old saying is doctors make the worst patients. Either doctors or nurses, but no doctors, because that's more self-effacing humor, the doctor being the worst patient. But if you think you need a bagel and then we'll just take a shot, then for, I don't know, the rest of your life, when we don't really know the long-term consequences, even doctors will feel like the FDA approval process has vetted out all of the possible problems, which is so naive and short-sighted. So, but they're human too.
And to be fair, at least they're making an informed choice. That's the, I want to say.
Well, but she didn't know about a chaffle.
Yeah, that's true.
So I teach a lot of substitutions.
Right.
Yeah, and I joke that it's not me, it's the method, really. And I think it's the strictness. But there are some tricks of the trade, meaning finding substitutions, the practical aspects of it. If there is people come back and if there's a lingering carb there, I'll say, well, can we find a substitution for that? And not everyone gets it right the first time. So if you're a doctor who says, well, yeah, no one can do that. Here, take the pill or take the shot. I'm like, well, it's more like learning to ride a bike. Did you learn to ride a bike? Yeah. Did you learn to ride the first time? Well, no. So you might fall. you try again. You might eat some carbs. You learn about it. So I have to, in my area, I'm kind of known as the stickler about the diet. And when people get tired of me, they go see my colleague over here who prescribes the pills and shots, but he's out of pocket. He's not in insurance. So when they can't afford that anymore, then they come back to me and tolerate my, but I've learned that the chaffle is a revolutionary breakthrough actually.
Wait, explain a chaffle, what it is.
It's a cheese and egg waffle. So it's a waffle with a different ingredient, basically. And you can make these mini ones. And in my clinic, I point out these YouTubers who are teaching how to make chaffles and even taste testing them, a little too much egg on this one. Anyway, so that gets into the detail of how the way that the practitioner does it matters. And if you go to your traditional doctor who says, well, they didn't look into it, they don't know anything about it, they're not going to go to these lengths that I do to find things for substitutions, cauli rice, chaffles, sugar-free Jell-O for the fruit flavor, So there is a bit of a method. This is also
the value of the social media, right? Is that you also can just give regular, continuing, like there's a continual care component that you can provide as a content creator.
Yeah, for sure. And we started with a Facebook group and even a local support group. And that's just starting up again after the pandemic. It closed down. At a local church, there's going to be a support group. And that's particularly helpful if you have addiction, sugar addiction. And sugar addiction is basically defined by, craving the sugar if you give it up, and then reintroducing sugar despite serious health consequences like diabetes, and then having a withdrawal syndrome when you go off it. And I saw someone recently with the husband and wife, and the husband said, I don't want her to do it because when she was withdrawing off the sugar, she was kind of hard to be around, So we talk about substitutions and the keto adaptation, and there is a little bit of a knowledge base about getting started, and the support groups. Even face-to-face are important. For some people, it's as deep an addiction as alcohol. And I know several of my colleagues were at meetings and, where are you going? Oh, no. I said, well, no, where'd you go? They were going to AA meetings, even though they were out of town at some other. So Alcoholics Anonymous knows that contact, even on a daily basis, sometimes is really important for some people. And I think that's true for sugar too.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've already talked about it on many of my prior episodes. I'll just say it here now. Much as I love low carb, or just for that matter, people wanting to get a sense of how better to adjust their diet, you just cannot take off the table the importance of the social interaction, of morning routines, of things in your life outside of diet, but often integrate diet and influence you and your choices on diet. You've got to be mindful of that. A lot of people fall off their diet during the holidays. They come a lot of times with the best intentions. They're going to, find the lowest carb thing on the buffet table that grandma made, but she's also got her pie that you have warm, loving feelings about consuming as a child. But on top of that, you're seeing the rest of your family consume it, and they seem to feel like you're dejecting them by not consuming it yourself. That's not a good enough reason to fall off your diet, but it's understandable that those pressures can be important to recognize, and a lot of times to prepare for. I don't know about you, but often when I'm going home for the holidays, I come with food of my own in hand if I think it's going to be a challenging situation. So I bring my own cheese sticks. Sometimes I make my own treats, my own keto treats, or for example, I'll have baked low sugar chocolate chip cookies, because often the gooeyest, most delicious chocolate chip cookies are there, and I'm like, then I can at least feel like I'm participating.
Yeah.
But my preparation helped keep me on the straight and narrow. Because here's the other problem. The other problem is, I don't know about you, but I know this is the case with many, probably most people. the moment I cheat, even if I'm giving even if I'm telling myself I'm just doing it this once, I break the seal. And now all of a sudden that's on the table. That's in the menu of possible things I can consume. So now past the holidays, oh, okay, well, I'm in an airport. What can I do? I'm going to have, and my level of resolve has changed from having that one cheat.
Yeah.
So these are things you have to be mindful of. It's not just good enough to know about the diet or even the initial practice. It is that constant connection, not only with these choices, but with the people in your life who hopefully are interested in the same thing.
Well, a couple of thoughts about that. One is if you reversed a serious medical condition that you've had for 20 years, you have more resolve to stay on it.
That's what we see.
But still, people who develop diabetes, in my experience, are some of the worst sugaraholics. People who go for weight loss surgery, they're the worst sugaraholics, or carbaholics, we can call them. And even then, they allowed somebody else to operate on them to handle the addiction. So my early years as a resident in internal medicine in the hospital and then in the clinics, I saw people who would smoke through their tracheostomy. So they couldn't breathe through here. The air is just coming out of here. And they would go outside and smoke through. And the tobacco caused the cancer that they had to remove from their neck. So, there is an addictive component, which is fascinating. I'm hearing now, rumors of, well, if someone eats bad things or they smoke, we shouldn't pay for their insurance. And I grew up in the addiction world and know that people aren't in control. And so in the obesity medicine or keto medicine mindset, over the holidays, it's a relapse. So January is very busy in the clinics because people come back. We go over the damage report, so to speak, and say it's okay. You just get back on. And yes, you have to, taking a Band-Aid off, do it all at once. It's less painful. And, get all the stuff out of the house. There's a trade-off.
This is comparable to alcoholism, too, in that, I just want to ease off of having fallen off the wagons. It
doesn't work. Well, hopefully one day it'll be socially unacceptable to offer a carb to a carbaholic, or even a food pusher will just totally, squelch someone's resolve, make them cheat. I hate that language, by the way. It's not like I have to send you to the principal's office for cheating on a test. It's just eating carbs. And the more, so immediately I teach people about the grams of carbs. It's a quantitative thing. It's not like a cult where, you're going to die if you have some, and because you've eaten them for, X number of years. They haven't killed you so far. But a lot of people do bring up the idea that it's like poison, just so they can stay away that initial, 3 to 6 months. In that 3 to 6 month period, carb creep is just, I just expect it, that carbs will start creeping back in and kind of like whack-a-mole, that game at the fair. What is it now? Which kind? Well, in North Carolina, it's sweet tea. Okay, well, you can't have that. Well, it's my, grits. No, can't have. Turns out a lot of people that I'm teaching don't know anything about nutrition. And I still have to meet them where they are. And so I think the brilliance of the method I use that makes it more doable is that it's just listing the foods in English. And I have a Spanish translation, and other people have put it in other languages. But you don't have to understand what an amino acid is or a protein, or you don't have to use an app, and it's just stay to the foods on this list. And when someone comes back saying on the list that they're having sweet tea, someone did, and I said, well, you can't have sweet tea. And she said, well, you never said I couldn't.
Right.
So, that's the follow-up. So in that class that she was in, maybe I didn't say, and no sweet tea, or maybe she was sleeping because of sleep apnea. She was tired during the day, and so now it becomes a method. So we know it works if you do it. I mean, 2005, you put 25 people on a research board. They all lose weight given ad lib access to foods. It was a pre-post kind of study. So we know it works if you do it. So there's an element of how do you teach it properly? How do you follow up with people to make sure they understand? How do you explain that, it's not a linear ramp like this for the weight loss. It's more like a stair-step pattern. People will say, well, I didn't lose weight in 2 days. I'm at a plateau. So this is all obesity medicine. We teach the people to be supportive. The doctors who generally are supportive do great in whatever technique they're using.
This is also where social media can also be a problem, which is that you see the Fitfluencer that they were at 300 pounds. Now they're crushing it. They're showing off their gym photos. I lost 90 pounds in the first 45 days or something ridiculous like that. And what happens is you have folks who actually have done the best ever when compared to themselves for the diet that they're on. But they're like, oh, but this is still taking so long. And oh my gosh, I've stalled for a whole week. This is crazy. And if you're not already anticipating that this is going to be part of the journey, you're going to get yourself in trouble when all you're doing is you're looking online and seeing the most successful stories that are out there for the diet that you're on.
Right.
It's a journey.
Yeah. But so one method I've had through the years reflecting is I try to get myself next to really smart people, right? So I actually worked with the inventor of the nicotine patch. He's still a friend. He lives in Durham. He was at Duke, and we in the VA we worked together. And then visiting Dr. Atkins or other doctors about low carb diets. Recently, I had the book written with Amy Berger, who's super smart. She helped write the book, and it's an award-winning book because, well, she's a professional writer and has her own understanding about keto. And so the things that she'll say is that the social media is like the highlight reel. It's like the highlight of the game. Most of the time it's dull and boring, and not everyone gets those kinds of results. Of course, that's at the little, your mileage may vary at the bottom of the TV screen. Of course, with drugs now, and also watch out for this and that and the other thing, ketoacidosis, and if you have an infection anyway.
Now there's I'm going to sound like I'm speaking out of self-interest, but this is just the truth. I think another powerful motivator is blood work. So you get your blood work right at the beginning of your attempt to go on the diet. I tend to find there's a lot of powerful things that happen. One, I think it helps when somebody has a check-in point. It's like, okay, well, this is my check-in point. This is my before pictures, but on the inside. Yeah. And now I'm very interested to see my after pictures. With a lot of my family members who I'm trying to get to do something health related, I say, let's get your blood work right now and just give me X amount of time. What I'm hoping for is I can talk them into like 30 days, but if not that, at least 2 weeks. And then we get your blood work at the end. Just, what, you can even look forward to when the trial period is over. That's fine. But at least think of this as an information gathering exercise. So you at least know what's possible. The diet I'm putting you on isn't maybe the diet you're going to, find is sustainable. That's fine, but can you at least find out what diet can do? Because while you're hanging out thinking, nothing's working. I'm trying this diet, I'm trying that diet, and my blood work seems to be bad no matter what happens. Well, get really focused. Try doing this like I was talking about earlier with myself, with an experiment that's very controlled. We can all do something in a short amount of time if we put our mind to it. And if we don't think that this is the rest of our lives, I think that's when you can kind of get inside your head and become defeatist too early and then fall off the wagon too hard and then feel like nothing works.
Yeah, I totally agree that the baseline labs, even measurements, the waistline, the arms, this is what obesity medicine clinics do periodically. I mean, they also will talk to you about all the other medicines you're on that might be causing weight gain or making it slow down. This time of year, the springtime in North Carolina, the pollen comes out and the steroid nasal sprays come out, and it thwarts weight loss. The steroid shots in the knees and the back, or sometimes the detective work I need to do to see what changed. Oh, I don't know. No, any new medicines? No. Any injections in your knee? Well, yeah. Well, so that becomes is unearthing the language and just seeing what's happening. Yeah, checking labs and before, during, after is a great idea. The ones that will pretty much always get better are the blood sugar domain, right? So even then, that going to a LabCorp, getting Own Your Labs test, I think is a great idea. Or even now, continuous glucose monitors are over the counter. I think they're like $80 and they work pretty well. You can check the Keto Mojo is a great glucose and ketone monitor if you want to do that. Or in my clinic, just follow the list. So this is kind of the way I pitch it. So that if someone has had labs in the last 6 months with another doctor, I don't force them to. But there's no question that can help a lot of people. Of course, over time now, I'm getting more and more people who come in. They've done keto, low carb for 5 to 10 years. The blood sugar isn't quite normal. The A1C isn't quite normal. Normal compared to carb eaters. So I have to explain that this is a different situation. Your insulin level is low now. You're not having all the carbohydrate input to your body. And so I know it seems a little stretch, but I don't think these people have diabetes.
I don't think so either. This is actually this is an area where I get a bit vocal myself, but not too vocal because I realize it's controversial. I think that, for example, my own fasting glucose, when I'm militantly keto, could be like in the 90s. My fasting glucose in the 90s. My A1C,
which is normal, right?
Yeah. My A1C, though, has bounced between 5.5, 5.9-ish, right? Sounds terrible. But under the same state, I'll throw on a CGM, line is flat. And I'll get my fasting insulin, and it'll be between like 2 to 5 milli-IU, right?
Well, but even speaking the old paradigm language, it's the multiplicative product of the glucose times the insulin that is the HOMA model, so that the risk seems to be a function of that. So the product of those two. So if your insulin has come way down, even though your glucose hasn't gotten to that normal for carb range, you're at much lower risk when you calculate the HOMA.
Even in that case, though, this is why I bring it back to what do I think is happening, and to get into the geek realm for a moment, I think it's the Randall cycle, body wide. I think that while I'm more adapted to fat, I have more fat, literally fatty acids in the cytosols of my cell. That means there's going to be less GLUT4 expression. That means that there's going to be less taking up of glucose in my cells. What does that mean? Well, that means that glucose is going to be spared out more for cells like red blood cells.
Well, and where are the cells that need the glucose?
Right.
In the blood.
Right, exactly. So
blood sugar goes up when you have an infection.
Exactly, right.
To help you fight the infection.
And this is why context matters.
It does.
Diabetes is a disease of dysregulation, right? So we would expect for when we see somebody who has a high fasting glucose, let's say that they have an A1C of 5.9, and we throw a CGM on them, but they're diabetic, it's real prediabetes, like I was when I was getting my A1C of 6.1 that got me on this journey. I know for sure if I were to throw on a CGM and I ate something, it'd go like this, and then I would also have hypoglycemic responses. I remember that. So my glucose is going like this. It's not a flat line. And I don't know for sure because I didn't get my fasting insulin tested then, but I'll bet you my fasting insulin was 8, 9, 10, maybe higher.
And then you had a response after the meal to keep it down.
Right.
So if it's the area under the curve of insulin, that's the main factor, it's going to be a lot worse.
Right.
Well, this could be ferreted out in a data set that someone collected for other reasons. So if you have a set of the folks with diabetes, and you really didn't collect what they ate very well, or they ate a varying amount of carbs. It doesn't have to be a low carb kind of study, but look at the complications and complication rate as a function of the insulin and the glucose. My hunch is that there will be fewer complications in those who had the lower insulin level in the blood. Of course, then it's complicated by most of these people are on insulin shots. So anyway.
Well, but for what it's worth, this is actually one of the things I'm hoping Own Your Labs can bring to all of us. So Own Your Labs, as you know, it's not just that we resell, the service with regard to like LabCorp. It's also that we incentivize people to submit their anonymized blood work, and along with a little bit of demographic information. So if they're putting in that they're low carb on a low carb diet, some of the demographics as to, for example, if they're leaner and so forth, and their blood work comes back for, say, fasting insulin being consistently low, right? What would we tend to see with things like we're just now speculating on, with glucose possibly being higher, A1C possibly being higher, but alongside consistently low fasting insulin? How meaningful is that data? And again, I'll say what I should say, which is this is still theoretical. It's a hypothesis. Right. I don't know this for sure. It's just what makes the most sense to me. The concept of homeostasis itself, this concept of control, you just don't see the kinds of lines that we see with CGMs, with glucose, than those who regain or get metabolically healthy and are on a very low-carb diet, suggesting that the body's very effectively holding to that delta. It's keeping it tight because that's what it's normally doing with glucose in the bloodstream. It's going to be sure it gets up enough so that all the cells have it on demand. It's going to be sure that if it gets too high, it's pushing it back down. But it's not the one, but it's one of the substrates that's acted on to keep within this range.
Yeah, I hope the Own Your Labs data can be looked at and disseminated at some point.
It will. It's meant to be open source at the point.
Awesome.
The challenging aspect of it is, as I know you know as a clinician, we have to be very careful to cross our T's, dot our I's, and
of course
be compliant with HIPAA. But right now, terms of service, if you're going there currently and you take the Citizen Science discount, we outline it for you there. And again, it's all anonymized. But there aren't any good data sets that are open source on low carbers.
Yeah.
It's a problem.
And that would be a breakthrough to lead the way for other people to allow it to be transparent. But one last thought, if someone comes to me with a blood glucose that's not perfectly normal compared to carb eaters, let's say they're at their weight loss goal, the other metabolic parameters are all normal, and I've done this in the last few weeks, I just reassure people, like we're talking about, that the insulin is low and just hang in there, don't bail out. A lot of people are getting labs, I think, way too soon. And as we learn about keto adaptation, it's something that can take months to years to fully keto adapt. And I do have a few people who, over those years, the blood sugar does come down to what was expected to be before. But not everyone does. And so I'm kind of asking, even this is a great question for Ben Bickman, where is the glucostat? Where is the thermostat that controls the blood sugar? And there isn't one. I mean, there are multiple ones. I think it's organ dependent. And at a certain level, like you said, the cells are saying we don't need it. Keep it in the blood for the blood and the brain as much as it needs it. Of course, the brain is using a lot of ketones too. But, I would love to see just the basic metabolism of a keto and low carb diet outlined in humans. Like a lot of the stuff we've learned is actually from animals. Those charts we see on the wall, the liver, the understanding there is actually coming from mice. And I'd like to see that all done in humans.
And that's a huge challenge because, again, to kind of head in the geek realm for just a moment, mice have different lipid metabolisms than we do.
Yeah.
You probably
they're not good models.
They're not great models. that's important if you're powered by lipids. If you're powered by fat, how the fat is handled by lipoproteins is an important piece of the story.
Yeah.
Their subcutaneous fat operates in a different fashion than ours does, to the extent to where we have so much storage, relatively speaking, comparatively for the configuration, if you will, for how it is that we process it with the liver. These are all things that I'll throw in one more, by the way, which is that they don't have cholesterol ester transfer protein, which is important for this kind of exchange between the two. Anyway, I digress.
That's okay.
It's frustrating when there's such an effort at using these models, particularly in the case of diet, to be generalizable. Yeah. They're a great starting point to test certain hypotheses, but they're quite distant.
Well, there was a book, I reread it, it's out a few years ago, it's called Rigor Mortis, like the stiffness after you're dead. It was a journalist, investigative journalist, like Gary Taubes' type of writing, and he basically goes through all these animal models of human disease, and they're not good. In fact, so there's actually kind of a circular process where we'll assume that cholesterol in humans is the problem. So we're going to find an animal model that we can create atherosclerosis with cholesterol in the animal. Of course, then we will say that then it will apply to humans. See, in the animal model, but it wasn't the right model to begin with, the cholesterol story. Maybe it's inflammation or something. Well, I emailed with Gary Taubes about this recently, and he remembered interviewing someone years ago who came up with a model, and what he recalled is that the investigator said they went through something like 40,000 mice to find the model.
Right.
So basically you're using mutant mice
right.
On the model that may not be the best one. So, let's say the cholesterol story matters and you can use medicine and lower it and get some benefit. There may be other ways to do it. Why the internal medicine and cardiology field has focused just on this and ignored and squelched everything else. Of course, it's not squelching as much. I mean, I've never been squelched, but there may be another way to do it, right? So, okay, that you muzzle the gun so the gun can't fire and you save, but what if you take away the gun, right? So anyway, the newer story or other hypothesis of inflammation being the root cause, cholesterol being kind of a downstream thing, and the animal models being recapitulating what you really, the wrong model is being modeled so that you're just restating the cholesterol thing in another way, but it is not the right model or not the complete model. I'm afraid that it goes even further because FDA wants things to be studied in animals first. So it's like the business of animal models is a business. And, so a study comes out, 23 years ago where you can take people and they lose weight over 6 months without animal models. That was our study. Who were the animal models to support it? So one of the things we did different, is we didn't use animal models because I'm a human-centric researcher.
I'm kind of glad that there's no lean mass hyperresponder animals that we know of as of yet. It'd be difficult to, but we might be getting the same pushback.
Well, why don't we use people, please?
Yes, why not? When I started doing any of this research, and I was by no means a formally trained researcher, I'm looking at it, I'm like, wait a sec, why do they keep identifying this type of rodent? They specifically say what, and again, I can't say what the name of it is, but they have a specific ID for the lineage in the same way that you're describing.
Yeah.
And then when I found that out, on top of when I found out what they feed them, they don't feed them what I think you could consider a species appropriate diet at a minimum. But then on top of that, to come up with these models of atherosclerosis from diet, they feed them what is called an atherogenic diet. Right? So they're trying to get to a point of having a specific lipid profile which incidentally, their lipid profiles, they tend to have lower ApoB than we do relatively. They tend to actually make more use of HDL. Again, the lack of cholesterol ester transfer protein is another confounder. But then they often do things like transgenic mice that can have a higher quantity of ApoB that's being synthesized due to these ways in which they're being edited. We're so far removed now from even their own physiology and their own species context that, again, I don't want to be dismissive. These are ways by which you can come up with some initial hypothesis building. But it's difficult for me to, again, take that at face value to then move upward right away into the human connections. This is why, yes, I totally agree. You don't start assuming it's going to apply to humans until you have the humans doing it.
It's even worse, right? The whole cholesterol hypothesis started with Anitz rabbits. He fed cholesterol to the rabbits with carbs, saw some lesions, and even that was in the minds of one of my teachers that he's a great teacher and created this cholesterol organization and all that, and he would say, and it started with atherosclerosis happened on the rabbit's arteries. No, please. That's one of the things that was used as supporting data, which is really kind of crazy.
But you haven't dropped the punchline. Rabbits are herbivores.
They're herbivores.
They're herbivores. I'll add to the story, by the way.
They're not humans. That's enough for me.
Correct.
Okay.
but I'll add to the story, which is they then, as I understand it, they then went and tested it with rodents and dogs, and it didn't work. It actually, once they were, because they're omnivores, but also the nature of how I think they rendered purified cholesterol. So it wasn't that it was just high cholesterol foods. Yeah. It was that it was...
And it was added to chow.
Right.
I went back and I looked. It was in the footnote of what the chow was. It actually had carbs in it too. But that reminds me of a meeting where there was a primate colony run. It had to be NIH funded. And the fellow was in North Carolina, the researcher, and I asked, what have you learned? He said, well, we create atherogenesis and we find that the drugs stop the atherosclerosis in this primate model, which, I mean, that's closer to humans, right? And then I said, well, what diet are you using? Well, we use the typical American diet. And I said, well, why don't you try an Atkins diet or low-carb or keto? And he said, well, that's not the point. The point is we're trying to create the atherosclerosis and then find a drug to stop it. So anyway, it didn't occur to them to try different diets to stop the atherosclerotic process because they were trying to create atherosclerosis. So, these are smart people who are just kind of barking up the wrong tree.
There's a big confounder in all of this, which it's a reason why all roads in my mind lead back to lean mass hyperresponder research. Your metabolic status impacts your lipid profile. Let me repeat that for emphasis. Your metabolic status changes your lipid milieu. So let me give you an example. Let's say that I kidnap you, Eric, and I take you to Dave Island. I say, I'm sorry, you're just going to have to eat sweets all day long. And you're eating a whole bunch of sweets. Is your lipid profile going to be different? Of course it's going to be different as you get to worse and worse metabolic health. Here are some predictions I can comfortably make. 1, your HDL is going to go down. 2, your triglycerides are going to go up. 3, probably your LDL will marginally go up, especially as you get to a higher and higher BMI, which is why the reversing of that changes the gears. Lastly,
so on this island, I'm not losing weight?
No, you're just gaining
plenty.
weight.
Okay.
Right, yeah. Lastly, as you gain more and more weight, there'll be a higher preponderance of small, dense LDL particles. And I would argue the reason that is because your fat cells are stuffed. The lipids that are coming in that are triglyceride rich are not finding anywhere to park them. It's creating this pattern that we see often. Now, I then introduce some intervention. I don't even need to name what it is. But in that intervention, your LDL goes down. The very first thing I'm going to want to ask, given what the exact circumstances I set up, is, did it have any effect on your appetite? Did you lose any weight? Was there any way in which your metabolic status changed even a little bit? Because if it did, it would do two things. It would both lower your LDL, but probably also increase your HDL slightly, decrease your triglycerides. The problem is all of these are noisy, right? And reverse your ApoB might be going down because of your metabolic health improving, potentially being its own confounder, right? This has always been the problem that I've had. If you have some dysfunction, not just in your lipid metabolism, such as those who have molecular FH, but also if you have some dysfunction such as acquired disease like insulin resistance syndrome, these both have an independent impact on your association with development of plaque and also on your lipid profile. So we could never really get a clean signal of how much the lipids in particular impact the atherosclerosis without taking away those confounders that impact both. And this is why it's a problem if we're looking at including animal models and we see that there's something that can seemingly reduce ApoB or LDL, but we're not exactly sure if that had something to do with a change in metabolism or in a way in which it's getting processed. We're only thinking about it in terms of the kinetics of just what the total combination of them are, right? And this is why we need to have a population where the signal's by itself, where the high LDL, the high ApoB is on its own, so that we could see how much there is that association with plaque development.
Was there in the LMHR paper, were the LDL sizes reported?
No.
Were they large or small?
I mean, presumably they're all going to be type A. So this is the paper, right?
I've handed that out a dozen times this week.
Yeah.
So.
And the major thing, I mean, it's right there in the title. So plaque begets plaque. If you have plaque at baseline, the odds of you getting more, the relationship between plaque at baseline to plaque in the second scan, there's a correlation there.
And that was 20% of the folks, or it was kind of hard for me to figure out what percent of the initial population had some plaque. I know it was mild.
Well, in this one, we did clearly scan, so all of them had plaque. Basically, everybody who participated when doing these AI-guided readings against their scans, they would have some detectable level of plaque. I want to say maybe it's not 100%, maybe it's something like 96 or something like that. But it's just about everybody. And then there's the second scan. The second scan also getting the same clearly analysis. That way we have a number with both, right? So we have the baseline number and then we have the secondary, or we have the second scan. And from that, there was able to be seen, the moment the second scans came in, what's known as great heterogeneity, which you're going to be very familiar with, in that the population wasn't easily grouped together in one big blob. There were some that were fast progressors and some that were slow to no progressors. The fast progressors were the minority, but this got a lot of excitement among, Adrian and April, the statistician there, and Matthew Budoff, because this is what they've seen in those who have genetic FH, particularly monogenetic FH. Maybe, actually, I can't say that I know that for sure with monogenetic FH, but I was talking to Dr. Karam Nasir about this even before we were doing the second scans, that this is what they saw when they were publishing, and it's why they think scanning is more relevant than ever. If you have high LDL, even if it wasn't from a keto diet, and you go get a scan, and you have, for example, a CAC of 0, there's not good evidence that if you do something about your LDL, you'll have a difference of outcome. Mm-hmm. Conversely, just to be fair, they would say there's evidence that if the calcification is higher, that then there's a reason to head towards treatment, right?
The power of zero.
The power of zero, right?
In the title of some of these articles,
right?
CAT scan or the CAC score. Well, but so glad we can talk about this. The initial read I saw in the abstract and in the presentation had a 0 to 45 scale score of
The total plaque score.
Total plaque score.
Right.
0 to 45. And almost, 2/3 had zeros, even though they had high LDL self-report for 4.5 years. And did that, if you boil it down to that, I guess it's a cruder number, how many of those zeros became a 1, or did they all stay 0?
No, so I want to say...
Because you're now talking about plaque score. Is that 0 to 45 scale the same score that was reported on the abstract?
Let's divide two things. One is semi-quantitative, which is the first data we had, which is an actual cardiology reader is going through
0
in
to
3D
4 with 15 different places.
Right. There's 15 different places throughout the coronary
0
arteries
to 3, I guess,
that are predetermined, let's call them checkpoints, that they go to each of those points and then they score it. And if a 0 is there's no visible plaque of any kind. A 1 is there's mild plaque. A 2 is there's medium. A 3 is there's heavy. So they do this in 15 different places. Again, each of those places having a score of 0 to 3. And then they add it up. That's what the total plaque score is. There's also other characteristics such as total stenosis score or segment involvement score. There's 3 others. But everybody's most interested in total plaque score.
And that's the 0 to 45.
0 to 45.
So what was that on the subsequent analysis?
So on the second set of scans, there was, I don't know that I can say for sure, but I want to say we had a majority in the first set of scans that had zeros. We had...
and that's in the abstract and in the video presentation of Dr. Budoff that you can find online easily.
And then we had a few on net that went from 0 to 1, I believe. Which is considered very mild increase. This, by the way, did not surprise me at all, though, because our cohort is 55-year-olds. Or I should say the average is 55-year-olds. At that point, I felt confident we were going to be catching plaque progression at a population level. And I was saying that even before we had all the second scans in. The bigger, more interesting question is, was it going to be a rapid progression, right? And that's where it gets interesting, because both on the semi-quantitative and then on the second one, which is the quantitative, that's the clearly. So semi-quantitative is things like the total plaque score. Quantitative is things like plaque volume, non-calcified plaque volume, calcified. In both of these sets, as they're coming in for the second set of scans, it shows there's great heterogeneity, which is to say it's not characteristically all the same, basically. There's actually a separation between groups. Those who are slow to no progressors, they're very distinctive from those that are the progressors. And me being me, I was like, well, so what's the final score? Like, what's the non-calcified plaque volume change? And when I was asking this, literally from day one, when the data had come in, and I'm like excited to get it, I'm getting back, the heterogeneity matters. I can't actually give you an answer like that, for the same reason that you can't get, like, let me give this example. It's a real world example that'll help people to understand why heterogeneity is important, that the statisticians would give to me, which is my wife's family. They're all relatively short compared to me, Filipino, right? And when I'm there could be even say like high 4s to 5 foot. I'm 6'3". So when I'm there in some gathering, I pop, right? But if you were to get the mean average of our height, it'd be, let's say 5.4 or 5.5, but nobody's 5.4 or sorry, 5'4", 5'5", but nobody is 5'4" or 5'5". Nobody. That's only because we did a mean average. But if you looked at median, you get probably 5 foot. And so immediately it becomes obvious by the mean and the median being separated that there's probably some heterogeneity. And that heterogeneity is super crucially important. And it's why almost as fast as we got the second scan, there was another paper being put together to not just identify these groups for researchers, but for clinicians. In fact, that one's right now already submitted. It got built on the heels of this one. And at that point I said, okay, but is is there a way to group it all together? To which I'd always get a 5-paragraph answer that effectively said, it shouldn't be presented or discussed in this fashion. You can't say what the group is. You've got to say what groups are that are within it. Because you can't talk about lean mass hyperresponders as though it's just one homogeneous blob. And to be fair, that was everybody within the group, and I started to recognize why that was so relevant.
So were the clinically relevant, so did anyone have a change over that year that would have been more than expected from the Miami Heart group, for example? Is there a way to check, was it someone?
There's no way to check because Miami Heart is cross-sectional. They're not longitudinal.
Yeah. So, but then, I would like to see a numbered with that total plaque score before and after, and then also the CAC score before and after as a clinical relevance, because I'm bombarded with, okay, it goes from 50 to 70 over 2 years, and the coronary artery calcium score, and do you worry about it? Do you go on a statin? Do you
this next paper?
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, and it should be published pretty soon. You could almost say that the paper we published just now is practically like a part 1 of 2.
Well, that's good to hear, because it almost seemed like it was obfuscated on purpose.
Obfuscated.
No, I'm not accusing you, or I was thinking maybe a reviewer. Why not say LDL in the title instead of ApoB?
Oh, well, that too also comes back around to getting back to how long these studies take. When we started, LDL was the star of the show, with researchers and clinicians alike. Even though ApoB was getting more and more of a recognition, it's really quite literally in just like the last 2-3 years come up at such a prominence that a lot of
so you thought that would be more persuasive or more relevant?
Yeah, it's not only just that it's more relevant. That's the team I'm working with.
Well, to the average patient, they don't know what ApoB is.
Right, but
they all know what LDL is.
Right, but we cover both. We cover so there's LDL, there's ApoB. We cover both. There's non-calcified plaque volume, which was what we were looking at the very beginning, and then there's this percent atheroma volume, which is also, both of these have both ApoB and percent atheroma volume are much more in favor now than non-calcified plaque volume and LDL from when we started.
But now you're getting into the multiple comparisons issue, but this is a pilot study. You didn't have just one p-value to one comparison, right?
Right. And this is the nature of what the team was telling me, especially coming into the second set of scans. It's worth really emphasizing. These guys are Matthew Budoff, for example, is probably seen more scans than anybody we know in our lives, right? Adrian Sotomoda literally lectures on statistics and and the deeper math and that understanding, especially as it comes back. I'm kind of the guy who's sort of helping to push it forward. As much as I've come to understand this, I'm still amazed at how much I'm still learning. And so to that extent, that's why I was kind of impressed at these findings that we were able to get from this paper. I mean, if you're somebody who already comes from a position of, I don't want to treat all lean mass hyperresponders the same as a clinician, we're about to give really useful information on that front.
Yeah.
And that's what I appreciate about what's happening now.
Yeah, so I hope you're getting some positivity, not all negativity in the feedback. This is such an important study to finally have published, that a statement that you always have to worry about the LDL ApoB is not true, that there are at least some people, and I think a reaction will be to minimize it or to compartmentalize. Well, that's just for those people over there. I don't know. It needs to be expanded to other people, and even the naysayers about LDL being a problem at all. There needs to be funding to keep pushing at what level or what disease does LDL matter, or ApoB or whatever. shift in language. I don't care. We'll measure them all. I mean, so.
Well, I guess the other major finding of this paper, and the reason the second part is the ApoB does not, is in these subgroups, there still was no association between LDL and ApoB and plaque development, right? So this is not to say that we would be saying to clinicians, therefore don't do anything about the fast progressors.
No. But there are those in our keto community who have unearthed kind of another set of eyes on the traditional view of LDLs and how, even at best, if you use it for secondary prevention, it has some effect, but it's not huge, right? I mean, so if there's an alternative treatment that is being not used or not studied because of this focus on LDL, I hope that starts to be whittled away. And so I don't know, it could be that this is the first study that kind of, pushes at the house of cards of the cholesterol hypothesis. That's the language of some of the people that we talk to in this community. I live and work at an academic medical center, and if I said that, I'd be perceived and would, be a quack. So I'm not saying that, but more research has to be done in this area because this flies in the face. This is what's the black swan. It doesn't fit. If you say LDL is the cause and always a cause, you found an area where it's not.
I mean, I've got to be a good scientist here and say it's possible.
Well, over 1 year.
Yeah, exactly.
Under the conditions,
we have 5.7 years total.
Well, I would discount the self-report. I always say, that was self-report.
Oh yeah, fair enough. So if looking at it in the 1 year,
they've documented their ketones even over this year, right?
Right.
Yeah. So are you going to keep studying these people, please?
That's the hope. Yes, I'm trying to finalize this extension. I don't know how many people we'll be able to re-recruit, but in the course of getting this extension, I think that we're going to be able to get 5-year scans.
That'd be awesome.
But it would be amazing,
yeah.
And it would be really good data. So if I'm trying to steel man the other position, is it possible that in the 5th year scans we then now finally see an association? And maybe it's with the heavy progressors. It's possible, right? That's why you just want to go get the data.
Yeah,
or maybe we see it across the whole population. That's possible. It's also possible we don't. It's possible that we don't know. There is an excitement, though, in identifying this heterogeneity, that there are this within groups.
Well, and I seem to remember one of the reasons LDL became a concern is that the children would develop atherosclerosis very young. Tell me about that again.
Yeah, so this is called homozygous familial hypercholesterolemia. I know it's a mouthful, but it's those who, it's literally 1 in a million that somebody has this. This means both their alleles, they have poor binding. Well, there's technically, I want to say 4 of these that are considered monogenetic FH. And Brown and Goldstein 50 years ago had landmark research where they were looking at this this little child and her sibling. They both had this disease, and sadly,
how old were they again?
3.
3 years old.
Yeah. So she had developed xanthomas at age 3, and also a stable angina at age 3, and had her first MI at age 6. So.
And they documented that there was a coronary atherosclerosis.
Yeah.
And
so
the LDLs were.
Yeah, I want to say hers was like 700, something in that neighborhood. And so, as Dr. Goldstein would say, and as I'm sure you've seen me present many times over because it was very compelling at that time, and I would say right now, which is this is the one case where we see that LDL is causal because the little girl was not a type A personality, she was not a smoker, she wasn't diabetic, etc. Right? And that brought them to the belief that it's just this is the sine qua non, full stop, and that it met the Bradford Hill criteria for strength as well as isolation, right? Now, lean mass hyperresponders come along.
Well, but in the intervening years.
Yeah.
So I see this in other areas of medicine, like blood pressure. If the blood pressure is 250 systolic, you can have a stroke. So therefore, we must lower it. Well, how low? So just because it's a problem when it's super high doesn't mean it's a problem when it's lower, and then how far to lower it. Even in the intervening years, when you use the primary prevention, secondary prevention studies, they need 5 to 10,000 people in these studies because of the effect size. The intervention effect was so low, so small. But so anyway, I just want to say I'm doubtful that it's the entire story, even with knowing about that girl, because of the other things that have been unearthed by David Diamond and others about the hypercoagulable state that they have also. And probably we can't go back and measure their inflammation, can we? So
we may. I need to double check, but I do want to check inflammation. I think we have C-reactive protein.
Well, but so now come up to today, the lean mass hyper-responders, who many of them had LDLs over 500. Wasn't there 690?
Yeah, there was. I think it was 592. 590. And I believe we had 4 or 5 that were over 400.
So the thinking is that if this child had a heart attack and an angina at age 3, that if you follow these people with super high LDLs, self-report now 4.5 plus 1, but you follow them for 5 years, they ought to develop some atherosclerosis if LDL is the causative agent, right?
Yeah, that's the point. Or at least with internal validity, that they would call it, within the study itself, you would see some association. And that's the fine line to walk on this, is that we're wanting to draw attention to, rightly, the major finding within our study, that there is no association between LDL, ApoB, and plaque progression, actually plaque presentation or plaque progression, at least for the data, the time set that we have, right?
Yeah.
But that said, this is what I would state that I'm pretty sure the clinicians would back up me stating. That doesn't necessarily make a claim as to, say, an intervention that changes it.
Right.
It just doesn't back up the I don't mean to say this in a derogatory fashion, but let's just call it the simple view of high LDL, high ApoB, more plaque, especially at magnitude, at scale. That's why there's a lot of value in bringing up Brown and Goldstein's work, because for sure we don't just have people with levels that are comparable, maybe not exactly the same, but comparable. But on top of that, they have the prior 5.5 decades of life, right? Our average age was 55 years old in our cohort. So well into being in a time of your life where you're laying down plaque, how much does your present day LDL, or for that matter, your future LDL, impact the plaque development? There should be some relationship that emerges even in healthy folks like lean mass hyperresponders that are quite distinctive.
If it's the problem. So, I got into this not out of worrying about cholesterol, and I was worried that it would be bad, and it initially was good with low-carb diets, or at least I saw a lot of people getting improvements in LDLs even. Of course, they were the heavier people losing weight, maybe more as a percentage more likely to lose. If you're losing weight, that your LDL would go down. But I got into the calcium score idea and then checking the anatomy kind of to protect my peeps. If someone comes to me, they're my patients for 10 years. I have these folks in Durham, and people who come to Durham even, and they have no evidence of coronary atherosclerosis at age 70, and yet their doctor wants to treat their high cholesterol. So they want to treat a disease that they don't have, atherosclerosis, with a medicine that treats a cholesterol level. That's the current practice in most of the U.S., is that the bar to treat is cholesterol, not the disease itself, atherosclerosis. So I'll even pour the water on in the sink in my room and say, it looks like good flow, but do we have any idea if the pipes are clogged? And then, so I got into this sort of through the back of, if these people do have high markers that seem like they would have bad disease and they don't have bad disease, what's going on? And at a minimum, what your study has done to me is to reassure me that if an initial change happens, it's not going to be catastrophic, like you're not on the edge of a cliff. That was the first response. Some of my colleagues in Durham they'll freak out. The doctors will freak out. Oh no, you're gonna die. Just take a deep breath. Let's measure the anatomy, or even if they do have calcium, if the calcium score is not 0 or very low, get some other kind of testing done. A lot of doctors now are just using a calcium score as evidence that you have disease, so you need to be on a pill or a shot or, to treat the cholesterol. But you wouldn't go to a cancer doctor and they'll say, well, you probably have cancer, so let me give you chemotherapy. Cancer doctors, in my experience, were the harshest, strict, we don't have biopsy evidence. We can't treat you. It's indeterminate, or you got to do the biopsy again. And then they wouldn't give chemo and radiation or surgery unless they had a tissue diagnosis. Where is that in cardiology or internal medicine, my field, where we're making sure you have the disease before we're treating you? So I think the pendulum has gone way too far. And, doctors in my area will say, well, the drugs should be in the water. It's so common to have this problem. That's an overstretch. I mean, is the experience that I'm relating to something you've not heard before?
Oh, I
heard it all the time.
On the internet, everybody, the loudest voices often reign supreme, right? Are there a number of people who feel ApoB is the whole game? No question. To be fair, there are a number of people who at least are trying to parse out what the nuances. Those are definitely going to be our peeps when it comes to this research. They're trying to get more of a complex view.
Well, but just keep in mind, the best metaphor I can use is it would be like you going into the Catholic Church on Easter and saying there's no God, or there's no Jesus wasn't the Son of God. You're just not welcome there.
Yeah, you're
right?
Not the first to make that analogy, by the way.
Well, but so there are other churches. Sorry for those who believe there's only one. There are other churches, and so there are other theories, and there are other. So the belief system that we all grew up with as internists, cardiologists, family medicine doctors in the U.S. is that it's cholesterol. That's the cause. And when I have someone come in, well, my cholesterol will go up. I'll just, if they're kind of intelligent, I'll just, which one? Well, the good one or the bad? Who I heard that from was from Dr. Atkins. He said, knowing the total cholesterol or cholesterol going up is like knowing the end of the hockey game. The score is 10, the total score. But who won? So you need the good and the bad anyway. And over time, I used to do the lipid profiles a lot, and the NMR lipid profile, the small and the large, but it didn't always clean up, even though people were doing keto and low carb, and so. But I think that as a model is a pretty good one. That triglycerides and HDL, the ratio tracks pretty well with the small LDLs, and that might be the kind of common language around this. If indeed these people had low or didn't have an increase. I don't know. It's a great study. Congratulations on
thanks.
it. And I know it's taken a long time. I've talked to you before.
Yeah. It's, though, I like to tell this story too. You were literally the first person in, I think it was in the low-carb cruise in 2016 or 2017.
Yeah, I remember.
I had just gotten a table. We're up in what's called the Windjammer. This is in Royal Caribbean ships. It's basically just a around-the-clock buffet. And I'm sitting down, I'm grabbing some food, and you, of course, are a superstar. I'm I'm sitting there, hardly anybody knows who I am, but you were paying close attention to how I was pointing out these different data points and trying to get people to pay attention. And I was getting some circulation within the low-carb community because it was very relevant to them. But you just like came near the table and just sat down right across from me. And I was like, oh, Dr. Eric Westman. And you said,
I think Sharon was off for food.
She was about to get food because it was a two-top. It was just the two of us. But I was like, I don't want to be rude, but if she comes around, I'll be like, and then you said, this is really fascinating stuff. You want to start working your way towards getting published. I was like, oh man, yeah, but I'm not an academic. I'm not. Like, it becomes real when it gets published. That's what you said then. And that was the point at which I started going, gosh, how am I going to get into all of this? And that got the ball rolling. And granted, those were very early days. I then would go on for 2 years knocking on the doors of the church, the church that was not going to welcome me in.
You can imagine it's just chunk, the cathedral. Chunk.
But then, I found the tribe, right? The tribe that's like, we should get these answers. We should get to the truth. We should know.
To crowdsource it.
Yeah.
So I hope everyone has heard that story before, and it's heroic, really, but people want to know, and I helped with that first study. I hope people will also support. You created the Citizen Science Foundation where people can give donations there, right?
Yep.
And the idea that you asked the powers that be, who are well funded, mind you, right? They're the ones who have the NIH or other sorts of
crazy amounts of money.
So is there going to be any interest, you think, now? Sometimes there's a saying that, well, NIH will study as long as you've already done the study and now you've shown what will happen.
I don't know. The same.
No one's called.
From the NIH? No, my phone's available if they want to call. The same things you were running into before, they reverberate into this era, which is, I'm just going to call it what it is. It's a kind. You said prejudge, right? Prejudice. It's prejudge. There is a pushback to keto, in particular, from, for example, the American Heart Association. It's actually in our documentary.
They were founded on low-fat diets. Right?
Yeah.
So don't expect them to change.
Yeah, but it's meaningful because when it's thought that this is a dangerous diet, why would there be a lot of research money devoted from the public treasury toward studying this? And so I do come back to, I appreciate how we are proving this is possible. You can't just say, hey, because let me tell you, when I started, I had no idea if this was going to work at all. Here I am, I'm putting together a freaking public charity, a genuine 501c3, which is really hard to do. Anybody who's ever tried it's so much paperwork, it's so legal, and it's a very lengthy process. I'm putting it together before I've collected $1. I'm going, I just know this. If I'm right about how controversial these results are going to be, then I need to be on the right foot from day one. So I put it together. It's finally launched. And how it gets launched is that I go up on that Houston stage. I don't remember if you were there. This was at Low-Carb Houston, 2019. And I had no idea what was going to happen. I said, starting this charity, this is the study I want to do. Here's the bullet points of what I want to make happen. Study these lean mass hyperresponders. I figure it'll cost about $2,000 per, and we need to do 2 visits each. So we could go as low as 25 people, but I'd need 50,000. But I'd love if I got 200,000 because I'd love to do 100. And even as I'm just on the stage, I'm like, I'm just going to be so embarrassed if I only raise like a few $100s. But I immediately took my whole Patreon of 7,400 and change or something and immediately donated it to be the first example. Like all the money I had that I'd gotten through the generous support of others. And it started the snowball. And I really didn't know, because I came from a world of technology with Kickstarter. Kickstarter, the people who are supporting you get a thing.
Right.
that's more tangible in their lives, seemingly, than the data, right? If you're usually getting a concert event, or you're making an indie movie, and hey, you'll get seats to or it's a product like a game. Because you were one of the early founders, you'll get first access, and you get to play the game. Here I am, I'm going to get some numbers for you. It's going to be a preposterous amount of work. It's going to take years, but then we'll have it, right? Then we'll have these data. And it was daunting, but props to the low-carb community, Eric.
I know.
They stepped up.
They did.
I've raised, I don't know if I want to speak out of turn, but between this study and the new study with the Triad study, I want to say we're somewhere around 3/4 all the way through, and this includes the extension as well. Now, make no mistake, I've had a generous support from donors who, for example, would do matches. Thank you, generous donors. But we have thousands, tens of thousands of donors who, some of them as little as $10. A number of people would put it on a monthly. Like, I can't give 100 now, but I can give you $20 a month for some amount of time.
Well, kind of like the brilliance of YouTube, where anyone in the popularity will grow it. Here, anyone can donate on that platform. And that first round that you got was before the Matt Bazuki and the Bazuki Foundation was a thing.
Years
right?
before.
Yeah. So, and that's just that story I like to bring up, because if a family is affected particularly and has a philanthropic interest, the Bazuki family has really done a great job of supporting the mental health research. And,
they're amazing.
Yeah.
The Bazuki Foundation, Metabolic Mind, they've been a real game changer in the whole landscape of this. But there was another component that I credit for our success, which is we have a standing commitment to not take any money for ourselves, full stop. So our actual admin overhead is something a little less than 5%, and that's because of credit card processing fees and DonorBox, which is the charity platform. Pretty much we only pay hard costs, and even then, if it's a close call on the hard costs, I usually have Own Your Labs backstop them. And for what it's worth, this is also the genesis of the Collaborative Science Conference, or COSI. Mm-hmm. Another one of those places where I had an ask that I didn't know how that would go over, to ask amazing people like yourself to say, hey, we have this conference, and whereas in every other conference they would compensate you for flying out, they would compensate for your lodging.
Hotel.
Hotel. At least that much, if not honorariums for the big names. But I'm just humbled at how much just getting this going, getting it rolling, getting good people involved. People want to be involved to make it happen.
Well, I'm sure I've done this before, but you're welcome to come to my clinic anytime and meet people who are fundamentally changed. The reason people get involved and donate for more science is it's not being done elsewhere, and it was totally life-changing for them. I mean, let me pass that along to you, that I see people every day who come in, oh, Dr. Westman, you're so great. I said, no, it's not me. It's the diet. It's the approach. It's, but someone has to be the teacher, right, of it. But it can bring people alive again. I kind of joke, I sometimes play the role of getting people in shape for their retirement, because they're at the end of their career and they're like, oh, what am I? And I get that, and then they start joining the cult of pickleball or tennis or something. So actually, the enthusiasm that you see at the meetings and the financial contributions are because of the life-changing nature of the lifestyle change. I mean, it's just food, which can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it really is. And I feel like it never gets the level of attention it deserves.
I know.
It's
how do we fix that? Because even today, people come in and I take their histories, and I have some forms here if you want to look through them, that someone was eating Fruit Loops, an adult. And I want to just kind of go, what are you doing? Yeah. So anyway, the food.
I'll tell you part of it.
Industry and
yeah, exactly. I was going to say the food industry. I'm sure you've seen the Food Compass. I'm sure the issue that I had with the ADA from last year, the concept, frankly, of just allowing for all of this to come into play, to I'm trying to find the most diplomatic way of saying it, but to feel that what your choices are with food are not going to be as relevant as these things outside of your diet that influence your weight, I think it's disempowering. We have a lot of control. We have more control than we realize. One of the things I bring up all the time, and you alluded to it earlier, is a lot of this is just habit. Everything we eat, we learned about in the process of growing up, in the culture that we're in, and the cuisines of the region that we're at. And how often is it that our diet changes not for dietary, not for chasing a diet reason, but because you got introduced to some new casserole? You're like, oh, this is actually interesting. And I like it. I want to eat this more. Often when we're hearing a diet is restricting X, Y, and Z, you don't have all the hope you should have for these new things you could discover that you may really like on the diet. But on top of that, you've got to trust the process of building new habits, because everything we like to eat, a lot of times that came from the habit of eating it.
Right. And the craving and desire for it actually goes away quite fast. If someone is actually doing a therapeutic carb restriction, that those things can go away. But the thought in my mind was, if someone is 75, 80 years old, they remember growing up with bacon and eggs. In our lifetimes, it was cereal.
Right.
Think back.
I love Fruit Loops.
Fruit Loops, Captain Crunch. But that doesn't mean it's optimal, right? That's all we know for sure. And then the perpetuation of the sweet addiction. I'll say sweet tooth as a soft way of saying it in the clinic, but it really is getting people into that. And fruit being kind of the worst offender, because you have to have fruit. It's healthy. Not on a low carb diet. I mean, so there are some things that, they're healthy in general, but not when you're doing this. And then berries are little fruits, so they're a little better because you can actually have fewer of them, fewer carbs. Anyway, so how, now, being in this space for a while, first study published 2002, there's only been one other, so I teach at the Obesity Medicine Association all the time. Now maybe once a year, once every 18 months, but I used to be there every meeting talking about this science. And the other medical association that asked me to come speak was the American Society of Interventional Pain Professionals. The people who inject the back for chronic pain were looking for something other than opioids. So there was a backlash on opioid use. And so I was asked to speak in Vegas some years ago. And I said, I don't understand, but you guys asked me to speak. Here's the data. And afterwards, about 10 people came up, these interventional pain specialists, saying, we're using keto, low carb in our practice for pain reduction. And I haven't heard of that. Well, so there are all these other uses of what we do. It goes way beyond diabetes and obesity and metabolic syndrome, the Bazooki Foundation and the mental health, the epilepsy, the entire metabolism changes. And your study hits the one little thing that stopped it all, and that was the LDL or ApoB, and that I would. And also the amount of fat in the food. Mary Gannon was a great researcher in Minneapolis, and I was talking to her, and I said, why didn't you ever study the Atkins diet? She said, well, Eric, if we lower the carbs, what are we going to do? We increase the fat? So there was a taboo of even studying high-fat diets, and then LDL was if LDL goes up, the FDA won't approve the drug, and yet these are all kind of guardrails that possibly aren't the right ones. How's that as a diplomatic way to say it? But so if I go to an internal medicine meeting and say I practice the best internal medicine of my life by using the food, it's like I'm not welcome in the church of the drugs, the medications. And actually that metaphor was helpful for me because I don't like to be rejected. I as a person, I thought, here, look at the study I did. It's great. It got nothing but flack at first, but there are other academics coming along. I also want to say the Harvard group has done work with type 1 diabetes and surveyed the carnivore group, and Belinda Leonard's has come to some of the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioner meetings. David Ludwig is into this area now, trying to compromise the calorie in, calorie out, and carbohydrate insulin hypothesis believers into a synthesis, grand synthesis, which is great. And yet,
I also want to add one more that is a little known thing that I saw you. I believe you actually even had a poster for it. It was on heart failure. It was on keto and heart failure.
Well,
tell me a little bit more about that.
This is very interesting. This is and the dilemma, the cognitive dissonance here is delicious. So that heart doctors, of course, cardiologists are the ones who built the whole don't eat fat on the food, fat on the arteries, right? So the cardiologists will teach low-fat diet. Now it's Mediterranean, but they think that it's low-fat. I don't know how that works, but there really aren't a lot of studies about the Mediterranean diet. There's really one, the Lyon Heart Study. But anyway, so there's a drug that comes out for diabetes, and it leaks glucose in the urine, these SGLT2 inhibitors, Jardiance, Invokana. They started getting used, and one of my patients calls from the hospital and says, "Doc, I'm in the hospital with ketoacidosis." I said, "My goodness, I haven't seen this with the diet by itself. What happened?" He said, "Well, they put me on one of these drugs that caused ketoacidosis. I'd never seen it before in a keto clinic." So these drugs also are being studied to reduce the heart failure recurrence. And they work. So you're on these drugs, you have fewer heart failure attacks, and they're looking into the mechanism. It turns out that it's ketosis. That's the mechanism. So that the people who are on these drugs get into ketosis, and they've pretty much worked out that that's the reason the drugs work. So now there are studies being done infusing ketones in people's arms and looking at the heart failure function, and it's improving the heart failure, short-term studies. But when I say, there's another way to get people into ketosis, not by exogenous ketones.
What is it, Eric?
It's called the keto diet, and they go, "Oh no, that's not good for you. That's harmful." So, but it goes up against the fat in the food is terrible, and even though the saturated fat has been undone in the research level, it's not yet at the clinical level. And so Virta Health, which I have to shout out, has had a business that's been sustained and growing using a keto type of diet with an app and a Bluetooth scale, and it's kind of high tech kind of stuff. They counsel people to they're measuring ketones when they're on these other drugs, the Jardiance, Invokana. I just tell my patients to stop them because of the risk of ketoacidosis. But I have a poster where one of my patients lost 140 pounds on a keto diet and reversed her heart failure. That was an abstract there, so that a keto diet causes ketosis without infusing ketones in the arm or taking ketone supplements. Although it might work independently. I'm open to that you might be able to eat a ketone or drink a ketone and temporarily increase the ketone level and have improvement in the heart failure.
Am I allowed to sigh here?
This
is just look. How do we discover ketones? We discovered them because they were endogenously created. Because
oh no, it was the drug that created them.
Yeah, it's
I
just
know.
it's taxing because I say this with love in my heart. I think that researchers, drug manufacturers, they do get excited for what we've benefited from quite a bit with regard to medicines that have been life-saving and so forth. That the catch is that oftentimes I feel they get a bit too caught up in looking. It's the hammer and the nail, right? Every problem's a nail. Actually, in this case, there's so much good data now that if you can just come into the diet and if you can adhere to the diet, you're going to make your own ketones. You don't need some exogenous method to accomplish the same goal. But I'm going to go a step further. In the case of heart failure in particular, I'm very interested as it relates back to lipoproteins, because what I'm about to say is not controversial. It's just in the physiology of the literature. 70% on people on a mixed diet, 70% of the myocytes on the heart like fatty acids.
It runs on fat.
Not just finny fatty acids, though. The 70% I'm referring to, they like triglycerides off of a lipoprotein, right? So you already know this, I'm sure, is the chylomicrons when they're coming in from the gut. Where are they going first? The heart. The heart has first dibs to get the fat off, the fatty cargo that's off of that.
You know how many people don't know that? A lot of people.
Yeah, I hardly know anybody
doctors,
who knows this.
Yeah, so coming through the thoracic duct, so chylomicrons don't go through the portal vein. Now, a lot of drug manufacturers know that because if they put the drug on a fat and it gets absorbed in the fat, it will bypass the first pass metabolism. Right. But the heart muscle itself loves fatty acids and ketones too.
It's not just that it loves fatty acids; it's that triglycerides are a highly reduced form of fuel. So if you
that's why you'd love it.
Yeah, well, right.
Anthropomorphication.
But you these lipoproteins, they're like tankers. They're like they're giant tankers of fuel, whereas a single glucose molecule, even a ketone molecule, or a fatty acid, right? Maybe attached to albumin and so forth. They do not compare to this thing. This thing has ATP potential in the millions, right? This tanker here.
So as I started reading, so as an internist, I dabble in cardiology, pulmonary, nephrology, I lipidology. So I'm reading about cardiology and the heart and heart attacks. In the 1990s, the model was let's stuff glucose into the heart. Is lacking blood, lacking oxygen. Let's stuff glucose in with insulin. So they had randomized trials with insulin being used to treat the glucose during heart attacks.
How did that
Stuffing
work
glucose
out?
in. It didn't work. and the world experts still are on that model. And this is Canadian is very prominent in that field, and others who I've talked about, they just kind of roll their eyes and say, you're not going to change that guy's mind, So even though that was similar to when Barbara Howard, who ran the Women's Health Initiative, a low-fat diet in 48,000 women, when it didn't work, she said, well, they didn't do the diet well enough. So you always blame the patient for whatever your belief isn't when it's not working. And the low-fat diet didn't really do anything. It didn't reduce breast cancer or heart disease. So the idea of the heart muscle running on fat and ketones, in fact, in a modern paper that looked at all metabolites, in the abstract, the author says, we were surprised that not much glucose was used by the heart. And I when I teach, I say, don't write that in the abstract. That shows that you kind of didn't pay attention to prior knowledge,
Right.
So anyway.
Getting back to animal models, if you like animal models, especially this one, I got one to tell you, which is that they had a way to selectively delete cardiomyocytes on rodents. And when they did, they therefore could soak up the glucose, the ketones, and the fatty acids, but not. What they did was they deleted lipoprotein lipase. So you couldn't have the turnover of these triglyceride-rich lipoproteins. Heart failure.
Yeah, that would not be good.
Massive amount of heart failure. Right.
So you delete the ability of the heart to use fat.
Specifically triglycerides, so through lipoproteins. Now, for what it's worth, I'm not talking just the animal model. I've already watched lectures for humans that have a lipoprotein lipase deficiency, particularly in the heart. And sure enough, you can actually see it. I forget what the nature of the scans are, but you can actually see the glucose usage. And unfortunately, they have a lot of problems. They have a lot of problems with their hearts, and I think there's difference in the size and the function and so forth. So
the case study, 45-year-old female losing 140 pounds, her ejection fraction went from 20 to 50%, almost normal. I don't know if it was the weight loss or the ketones themselves that helped. In fact, back in the day, they said, your diet does too much. We can't study it. Was it the weight loss or was it the? And I'm like, come on.
This is back to the SECO thing, right?
Give me a multifactorial, and out. It's multifactorial. No, most people want to know the exact mechanism, and finding that ketones are therapeutic for heart failure. And one day, there's a study going on, right, with the Department of Defense, I'm told. I don't know more detail. Finney and Volek are involved with it, where they're studying ketones and even exogenous ketones with people in heart failure. If the cardiologist 5 years from now starts saying, here, take these ketones, or here, try this keto diet for the heart failure, that would be pretty amazing. Now, in my local area, I get referrals from the heart transplant team because many of these people are too heavy to get a heart transplant. As a stopgap, they'll put in a pump inside the chest. And it's very interesting because you listen with a stethoscope and you hear, and there's no pulse because it's continuous flow. So these people slim down, they get a heart transplant, and the heart transplant doctors love the fact that I don't use drugs, that I just change the food, and although dark humor would be, well, their heart has already failed, let them eat fat, right? Or okay, that was sarcastic, because no, they know. In fact, I think there are more and more doctors who are doing this themselves, and so then I ask, well, why don't you share it with your patients? It's like, well, I don't know, I worry about. No one's ever been sued for telling someone to cut carbs. No one. Back in the, because there are a lot of things that I just want to kind of don't bring up because it's so long ago. In modern history, no one's been sued for telling someone to do a keto diet.
I suspect, and I wouldn't know this. I suspect for exactly the patients you're talking about, they're clearly very overweight and far along in metabolic syndrome. You're right. At a minimum, I hope that there's a greater recognition of if the main reason that you're concerned is the LDL cholesterol, per the research that we talked about earlier. That's something you can almost expect to improve. It's one of the things that we try to say all the time is, even though we focus a lot on lean mass hyperresponders, in the overall of people who are going on the keto diet, they tend to be the fraction because they usually have some other reason to do it. Mm-hmm. Most people I know who are lean and metabolically healthy love their carbs. But for what it's worth, there are some, who are, for example, using it for treatment, who are using it for epilepsy, or they're using it for type 1 diabetes, etc. And that's important to keep in mind.
Switching entirely different let's talk about documentary films.
Oh,
because along this, it started. So I visit these doctors, publishing papers. I'm doing this in the clinic, and suddenly Serial Killers comes out, CEREAL. So Donald O'Neill and his group follow these rugby players and elite athletes, and Tim Noakes in Cape Town, who told everyone to carb load in his book, The Lore of Running, tears out the chapter, I was wrong. You should run on fat when you exercise. Serial Killers 2 comes out, where you follow Steve Finney. It's Steve Finney teaching Sami and Inkinen and his wife, and they row in a rowboat from San Francisco to Hawaii and break the world record by 15 days after keto adapting. And what I learned in that film, I got to visit Steve's house because I, never been to Steve's house, but Steve Finney, that is. The keto adaptation might take 6 months. So don't train your soccer kids a month before the season. You want to train them on the off season in keto adapt to run on fat. And so Sami Inkinen, of course, is the founder of Virta Health. And so it's the Serial Killers and the Serial Killers 2 are just extraordinary films. Of course, my patients watch and they say, well, doc, I just walk down the block. So it doesn't apply to them. But the point is you can do exercise and not eat carbs. You can run on fat. So actually that's when I first heard the language run on fat for fuel. I changed my discussion with some patients about running on fat, running on carbs. It's your choice. If you want to lose body fat, don't eat carbs because it'll stop your fat burning. And so the easy answer is just stop carbs. Your body will start burning fat, running on fat. So then Vinnie Tortorich gets involved with fat, a documentary where there's like the end of the world fallout. But anyway, but see, these are kind of sensational things, but I found them very helpful. The Magic Pill, and the fat fiction, one called First Do No Farm, Pharm, the story of Asim Malhotra. I find these films to be very helpful. I don't know if it is persuading doctors, but it supports patients and helps them understand for sure. And then come along the Cholesterol Code, the movie that I got to see the first viewing of just a short time ago.
I'm so glad you were there for that.
Tell me about the Cholesterol Code movie.
The Cholesterol Code was the blog that I started 2016 as kind of a workbook, if you will, of my experiments. I was kind of reporting at the time. It's funny to think back to it then because I was trying to just get people to just get attention on this, especially as I kept running into more and more people in low-carb community who had similarities with me. So I'm blogging it, and here we go. We went through the part of the story where I actually found the organization, Citizen Science Foundation. As I'm doing this, as I'm starting to set up the study, and I'm connecting more and more on the networking side with various people, as the study is actually getting to where the first data are about to be shown to me in private before they're actually going to be published. It's the first set of scans, at least I should say the first complete set of data. It worked out that I got connected with Jen Eisenhart. You'd mentioned Fat Fiction. Mm-hmm. Her and her team are amazing. And it was quite literally weeks before I was about to meet with Dr. Budoff. And we said, we should try to get the cameras there. Mm-hmm. Literally catch my reaction in real time. And that's what happened. And you see it. You see.
That's amazing.
You actually watch me hearing the news. And it kept following it for the following 2 years. At every checkpoint of when more data were coming in, the events that followed, the ups and downs, you saw some of that. And then all throughout those 2 years, I also got to do interviews with various people. And what I liked about our documentary was from coming out of the gate, we didn't want to focus as much on people who were doing this for weight loss. Mm-hmm.
Well, I noticed that.
Yeah, specifically, we wanted to, the people I was just mentioning before, Robin Dobbins uses it for her bipolar, Michelle Hearn for anorexia, Jen Unwin for eating disorder. It's amazing.
Was there type 1? Family,
Johnny Coughlin.
Yeah.
Just beautiful stories.
Yeah.
And it's just, when you get to hear it from them, that here they had this diet that gave them a new lease on life.
I know.
Except for this one thing, except for the cholesterol. You want to You want to listen. You want to know what's going on.
Yeah. And when will that come out?
Well, the hope is this fall. What they're targeting is September. How much control we have over that is, it's a matter of who the streamer is that ends up being the partner, and that's getting figured out right now.
Great. Well, I enjoyed being there, and the Citizen Science fundraiser was that weekend, right? And you showed the film during that weekend. Yeah.
It's a good flick, isn't it?
It's fantastic.
It's amazing.
I think people don't understand how much goes into that, though. Even into a study that you just are publishing off, and then that movie, we're so kind of used to getting material sent to us or in front of us, but it was fabulous, a heroic effort.
I can't express enough how thankful I am for Jen and her team and how hard they worked to make it the quality that it is. I mean, I can't stress this enough. You can make a documentary, like we could do one right here where we set it up and I have like 10 people rotate in and out of the chairs. Every single interview was a different setup. So the background, the change, even if it was in the same large space, they would do an entirely new setup before I interviewed a different person. So for example, I interviewed Georgia Eid and Chris Palmer on the same day, but they had, I want to say, a 45-minute gap between the two of them so they could do an entirely different setup with entirely different seats, with entirely different backgrounds, entirely different lights. It takes a ridiculous amount of work to do all of that, but they cared that much about the quality and getting everything just right. And it's working with a team like that. I don't even want to shoot my own movies anymore, like my own little at-home things, just because they're the pros. Wow. They're so good.
I remember they came to Low-Carb Denver and had a house set up as a studio for Fat Fiction, where they did the interviews. And that was interesting to see people coming to these meetings so that they could get all the interviews from people. Vinny Tortorich did that for film too. Oh, I should mention his latest one, Dirty Keto, which is about the junk foods that are out there now, and total carbs, not net, if you really want it to work, which means most of these junk foods out there don't fit into the prescription strength kind of keto approach. Well, so I wonder, switching gears.
Yeah, please.
This is my bookshelf.
Here, I want to get this up for the camera.
Well, I think maybe, or you could say, or I would just start.
There we go.
On the top right is the textbook Ketogenic.
Ketogenic. Who's the author?
Well, there are a lot of authors, but Tim Noakes is the lead editor, his group Nutrition Network.
That's right.
Do you have one? Do you have a copy?
I might.
Well, we'll make sure you do.
Yes, please do.
We wrote a couple chapters in there on basic nutrition for low carb and also diabetes and obesity. But on the second shelf there, if you start at the right, The Art and Science of Low Carbohydrate Living and Performance are classics.
It's old school.
Jeff Volek and Steve Finney.
Yeah.
I make students and residents who have an advanced curiosity look at those books. And then I started looking at the Food Junkies and Jen Unwin's Fork in the Road. The idea of food addiction and sugar addiction was something new that, we didn't talk about that 20 years ago. The classics were the Atkins and then the Dr. Bernstein Diabetes Solution, South Beach Diet, Phase 1 is a keto level, and then Protein Power, the EADS, and now...
We have all three of them in our movie, by the way. We have Dr. Bernstein, we have Dr. Agatston, we have Dr. Eads. They're all in the movie.
Of course, then that doctor from Toronto, Jason Fung, starts writing books, which are great. We all come from a different angle, and we need. Of course, I have all of 4 of Gary Taubes' books, which started Good Calories, or 5 now. The Case for Keto, he actually interviews practitioners who are using this in the U.S. And then The Case Against Sugar chronicles how it really is a drug and it was regarded as a drug, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Of course, the rising star is Ben Bickman.
Oh, yeah.
Why we get sick. Yeah, I have to think it's partially because he's articulate and has a YouTube presence, and then also has students at his university who can do experiments. So every time he speaks, he's coming with a new, well, I asked my class to do this, and he's presenting something like, we actually find out that the beta cells will start pumping out insulin after a day or two, and they're sleepy at first, which explains why you might fail an insulin or glucose tolerance test if you are doing keto for a while. So that's just a different paradigm. I find these books to be important, yet I don't know how influential they are. I mean, for I don't know, just your at the top left, my classics, the structure of scientific revolutions. So, in fact, I showed that to Dr. Atkins at a dinner once. I said, to change the paradigm, you have to have a new thing but it has to be sufficiently open-ended so that other people can solve their own problems. And I have a feeling that that's something that Dr. Atkins didn't have, is that he said he had the answers. And now what we're seeing is that other doctors are solving their own problems with it. And that's what's going to be needed for a paradigm shift or a change, a scientific revolution is the book, Thomas Kuhn. Then clinical epidemiology is a classic. That's where I kind of grew up as an evidence-based medicine critic. I'm not an early adopter. I want to just say, I saw patients, and as Steve Finney says, he'll say, Eric, I liked you because you did your homework.
Right.
So, just as that's my bookshelf, and it's required reading if you want to get up to speed.
When we were traveling in 2020, because that I was trying to make it more of a DIY documentary. Briefly, this was actually after I was on the Houston stage.
Yeah.
And we did. We got 36 interviews in 17 countries and 28 cities around the world. We literally circled the globe. And what I love is, while that got kind of bottled up because a certain something came along in 2020 or early 2020. By the way, and fun fact, our first stop, I want to say it was January 7th or 8th, was Beijing.
Oh, no.
So we arrived there, and we're hearing about this Wuhan thing that's going on, but everybody seems to forget this. There was a slow boil.
Yeah.
So first it was like, it's the SARS one, etc. Anyway, I'm getting all of this filming in, and we get to the point in which it's coming to a crescendo on what this, the word goes. I'm afraid to even say it on YouTube anymore, so I'm just not going to say it. But the event.
Yeah. And
then in the course of doing it, though, while I was in China, I got to visit a hospital where there was a doctor who was leading a team that was very interested in low-carb and keto. And they had, this isn't hyperbole, a floor in that hospital that actually had this library area, which had a huge array of books. It was every low-carb book I had ever seen before. And then they had me do a presentation. That's the only place where I ended up doing a presentation while I was on the road. I just looked at my laptop. And there was, let's say, maybe 30 people in the room who were listening intently, but there was one person in the back who was translating to the Facebook group. On the Facebook group, there were 30,000 people.
The scale in China is unbelievable.
It was unbelievable.
Is this Shenzhen?
Yes, Shenzhen.
I was there the year before.
You weren't just there. You were there in spirit, because after that was when I went to this other clinic area where you were everywhere. You were, I think you had visited, and you...
Yeah, Jackie Aberstein and I visited, and
yeah.
They showed me that room, and there were 2 little books. It's nice to hear that they filled out. Yeah.
Yes. No, it was I couldn't think of a book that wasn't in
Well,
there.
that reminds me, I need to catch up to see how they're doing.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
They're such a wonderful group of people.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I will say, while I'm sure there's lots of critiquing you could do with China, the one thing I will say is they kind of don't have big institutions pushing them around as much. So if a certain outcome seems to be efficacious, they'll head in that direction, or at least that's how it was looking to me, right?
I remember the hospital director kind of humbly said, and I'm in charge of these clinics. You know, there's 500,000 people in the clinics. So wait a minute. So, Jackie Eberstein has helped me through the last two decades. After Dr. Atkins died, the nurse that worked with Dr. Atkins, Jackie Eberstein, has kind of been a mentor for me, and I would always send the real difficult cases to her when she was still practicing. She's retired now to Richmond, Virginia, which to them is the deep South because they lived in New York their whole life. But Jackie and I had a great time teaching, and things were translated in real time, and also the list of foods that I typically hand out here was put into all these characters so that it was unrecognizable to me. We actually were at dinners using the Google Translate or some variation on that theme, where we'd be blah, 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 click. Because most of the people my age who were inviting us there had spoke no English. And of course I speak no Chinese. So
I just have to say, by the way, Jackie Eberstein's one of my favorite people. There's one thing I love about the low carb space is there's just a lot of good people, and she's one of the best. She's amazing. And also an OG. She was working with Dr. Atkins very early on. She's I always enjoyed her talks as well. She always had new and interesting things to discuss, and just clearly a wealth of knowledge. Yeah. She sounded more knowledgeable than a lot of the doctors that I've watched lectures from.
Yeah. Well, her story is that she said to Dr. Atkins, "I don't want to work for you because I found out who you were." And he said, "Okay, you're hired." One of those classic, to us, in the 1990s, Dr. Atkins was this kind of Wizard of Oz figure, it was, to visit and have those real world things, in fact, I learned that he lost money on his clinical practice. He was so devoted to clinical medicine, and that the bar sales or the products and the vitamins sales propped up his bottom line so that he could have a clinic, which it's a little discouraging if someone comes into this field and then they exit quickly, and they stop seeing patients. Occasionally that happens, and if you are able to support yourself on YouTube, great, but there are a growing number of practitioners in practice who are doing this now, but you don't need a doctor to change the food. You need a doctor for the pills and the shots and the surgery, and which led me to the Society of Metabolic Health Practitioners to be on the board and to help it grow, because we need to train other non-physicians, coaches and other people, because a doctor's overtrained really to do this. I don't need training to know how to do an appendectomy. I did one in training years ago in order to talk to someone about food. So it's a different set of knowledge. And the dietitians are just so, like the American Heart Association, the American Dietetic Association, now the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, was founded on, anti-meat, low-fat principles. It's hard to change that. Although whatever that 220 happening was, Jeff Volek and I were speaking at the major nutrition conference in Philadelphia. It was like, wow, we're finally, we were I remember there were 1,000 dietitians. This is a conference called FANCY, for FCN or FNCE, and haven't been invited back since, which is always a bad sign. Either they didn't like me or 2020 happened.
This was I'm gonna relate an experience that I'm gonna redact some details, but I'll just say I had an experience where I was visiting somebody in the hospital, and quite literally the term heart healthy for the diet that they were quote unquote put on was regularly being discussed in a dietitian. So it was a hospital full of doctors, but everybody was just deferring to, for the diet, just talk to the dietitian. The dietitian came, sweet gal, but I will concede there was no discussion on the diabetes status of the patient or the relevance of keeping low carb. On the contrary, there was more discussion on the quote unquote heart healthy. I'm not going to food shame the hospital, but I'm going to tell you, while there were some things that I thought were decent meals, a lot of them were high in carbs, and some of them were just cafeteria style from like it was a struggle for me, Eric, in that I had emotional, connection to the family and really wanted the best care, and I could express outrage as though there's some grand conspiracy behind it, but I don't think it's a grand conspiracy thing. I think it's a problem of an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem for which a lot of beliefs have been distilled to some degree, to where there's a feeling their level of expertise is doing the best that they can. I feel like
no.
In hospital settings especially.
Yeah. Well, so that's another fortress to climb and to change. And even at a place like Duke, they have a regional hospital, the university hospital, and one out in town. The doctors feel powerless, or they don't have any interest in the food. And that's pretty much, they farm it out to a company, Aramark. One year I was at the Obesity Medicine Association meeting, and we were in Philly, and the towering building there, Aramark. So they blame them, and Aramark says, well, we follow guidelines and all that. So, Aramark, if you're listening, let's change the food culture in all the hospital. They're the ones in charge. They could, with a flip of a switch, start introducing eggs in the morning. Or how about, a burger patty? Or how about, or let's do it sanitized, salmon and cream cheese in the morning, and you could do a Mediterranean style low carb. But so of all the kind of egregious things that have happened, outpatient doctors have given up diet. Medical schools have given up teaching about diet. Hospitals use the wrong diet. So it's as if a doctor just has no training and therefore no template for teaching about diets. It's really kind of a perfect storm, where then a company can go on and just say, hey, this lowers the cholesterol, Cheerios, so therefore it's heart healthy. Well, and where you should have to be able to prove that the product improves the heart, to put a label on it. So it's kind of like all of these things. However, if you take an individual one-on-one and teach them, it works. It's life-changing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's what we've always talked about, this as a grassroots movement, because of all these other kind of immutable, unchangeable forces. But actually they're changeable. It doesn't happen frequently. There's a vocal owner of retirement homes who brings people in, helps them lose weight, and then people leave the retirement home. It's not like a place where they have a retirement home and then when you need the long-term care and the Alzheimer's unit and all that. No, he feeds them a low-carb diet and they lose weight and they leave the retirement center.
Those are great stories. Because, of course, you think, well, my health is at a place now where I just need assisted living. How great is it to be, actually, now I've graduated out of needing assisted living at my advanced age. That's important.
Oh, and yet these could be little flames that, will grow. And talking about them is really important. Having the right confluence of, you do need money for a lot of, actually, no, we save money.
That's the craziest thing, right?
It doesn't compute.
I
Wait,
know
the health gets better and you save money? This can't be true.
I know this comes up over and over again, but it can never be stressed enough, which is that healthcare really, these days, it's sick care.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's where you make money, on the sickness.
And real healthcare is preventative. What brings us the disease? Okay, let's not do that. Let's not do that.
So here's another confounding or complicating factor. The universities that have public health, schools of public health, are run by PhDs who've all bought into the low-fat diet model. Seriously.
Yeah.
So at Duke, we're just 10 miles from Carolina, UNC. And some years ago, I went over to talk to the public health group, and it's interesting. It's low carb, and things get better. Then they go talk to their own cardiologists. Guess what they said? You can't do that. So I'm afraid, one of the prominent leaders there did talk about sugar-sweetened beverages, I have to say, which was great, and talked about the nutrition transition, which includes carbs when you go from a native diet to a modern diet, but he didn't want to single out carbs as a factor. Of course, this is back in I'm glad you call it the Atkins era, because that was a long time ago, and it's important for me to remember that time changes, time passes, and issues change, and that's why I really am blessed to be able to stay in a clinic where people come in with an entirely different set of concerns and issues these days. But I see things get better that other doctors can't see and can't fix with medications. And that's what keeps me going, is that, the Myocardial disease, which is a glycogen storage disease, an orphan, no one cares about it. There's a genetic company, actually, that's studying people to put a gene in the cell, and so you don't have to worry about the diet. You have a normal cell. Well, when 4 people with this rare disease got up at a meeting and said we're all better, it turns out that when the muscle runs on fat, it does just fine.
Right.
But the paradigm is that the muscle needed glucose, kind of like with the heart muscle and stuffing glucose into the heart attack cells. So I think
when you think one
new things will be found.
When you think one fuel is literally inherently better than the other, and that fat is a bad fuel, then of course it colors your view of everything.
Yeah, and I don't even know that people think that far ahead of it's just bad, right?
And why consuming it, it's problematic in that regard. I think we have actually watched, just in the time that you and I have known each other, I think we have been watching a sizable paradigm shift. Do I think there's still a long way to go? Yeah. In 2025, there's still pushback at the keto diet. There's still a lot of things that I think I see still to this day as to why it might not be considered useful or health, or my favorite, that's unsustainable. That, okay, maybe it'll help, maybe you'll get weight loss, but you can't keep it going forever. But at the same time, there's often a presumption of drugs that can help you with weight loss can be kept on forever.
Well, the drug companies would want you to stay on them forever.
Yeah.
Like the statin companies want you to stay on them forever. Yeah, the model is keep them on the weight loss shots forever.
Right.
You can still have your bagel. God help it. I mean, I hope there isn't some disastrous side effect of these shots. We don't know, right? They're too new. That
this is a challenge with the cycle overall. Just in the time I've been in this space, I've watched drugs come in. They're the new hotness, the quote unquote miracle drug. What miracle drug has remained a miracle drug that applies to the majority of humans? There's certainly miracle drugs that apply to the minority where you've got a special mutation or something. But what drug is indicated for all of us? or even the majority of us. As of yet, I'm not aware of any of them, but often,
Well, the statin.
potentially, some would argue that,
in the old paradigm.
But like, for example, when I was coming into this space, metformin was considered
Right.
really great and probably a longevity drug. I would hear this a lot. Probably a longevity drug. I'd be like, you need longevity to find out if it's a longevity drug. And now, again, after it's been in the, in the general populace, we've actually been able to see the issues. This is sort of my problem with how these drug trials are done, is often they have a run-in period. And the run-in period, and I'm not the only person to say this by far. There's plenty of people who are researchers themselves that will point to this problem. The run-in period creates a situation where people who would have side effects would get excused. So now the trial will not be a good model for what you could expect in clinical practice. And I don't even know why that's possible. I still think that that's one of the places where we should be changing things right now. But getting back to just the larger theme with regard to...
So in the defense of the clinical trial or the drug companies, they want to know what the drug does. They don't want to know that the drug doesn't work in those who don't take it, right? So that if you have a side effect, I mean, they should report that, of course, the trial or the intake. But so if I did a study, and this is actually kind of a concern of mine with the new metabolic mind funding of groups. Let's say you fund someone to do a keto diet for schizophrenia, and nobody follows the diet. You haven't proved that the diet doesn't work for schizophrenia. You proved that no one can follow the diet. So in their defense, they want to find people who tolerate the drug to see the effects of the drug. It's not generalizable in terms of the percent who have the problem or the side effects, right? But let me get back to the diet first.
Wait, let me play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate, though. The key difference is in the case of something where you're consuming a pill, the level of effort is much lower.
Oh, even in the best hands, you don't get 100% compliance.
100%. I totally concede that. I'm just saying that's a world of difference than a diet. I share that concern with adherence to the diet. But
so you need to use a simple system,
right,
that's had publications behind it. So,
exactly.
So if anyone needs to collaborate in real time with a program so I have people coming to me with mental health issues. A simple system is what you need. You don't have them measure ketones. You don't make them do macro counting. And you have family buy-in. And you need a simple system for it to work. I'm afraid we're going to see what we saw with a lot of the low-carb studies for obesity, is that the investigators didn't really go out and figure out how to keep people on the diet. They just used a book or something. And we visited a doctor who actually was using it for 30 years in the practice. So I didn't create what we use. I just studied it. And so I would hate that all these studies are funded, and then at the end of the 6 months or whatever, they say, well, only 10% stayed on the diet. No. Find a better dietary teaching pattern or approach. I had to get that in there.
No, but that's a very salient point, I think.
But I used to do drug trials too, in the old days for smoking cessation. And so I did learn there are a few tricks you can do to make your drug look better, for sure.
But the side effects, if you're going to tout the side effects, it's relevant. And for what it's worth, even adherence itself is a bias. That's also widely acknowledged. So adherence bias is an important component to bear in mind with these drug trials. But this is why so often a drug looks good in the trials, doesn't look so good when it's out in the wild.
Yeah, I think it's worth touching just briefly on the shots and all. And I think as a past president of the Obesity Medicine Association, I think they're going to help a lot of people. And yet the Achilles heel, if it's working too well, some people are totally appetite suppressed and then they lose muscle mass. So you want to eat protein. You want to do it with a diet that's based on protein first. Most doctors aren't teaching a diet. They just say go on the shot. And then, but I heard a talk by Bob Kushner, who's one of the leading authorities on these medications for obesity. He's at Northwestern. And he basically said, don't worry about the muscle loss. The next generation of shots will have a drug in it to prevent the muscle loss. I think this is not a sigh. It's a, oh my gosh.
It's, again, if sort of in my defense of them, it's the hammer and nail for better and for worse, right? Hey, we can better solve this epidemic with this other thing. But there's this other issue with drug-to-drug interaction. Those aren't typically studied.
No.
So we have this drug that has this side effect. Here's this other drug to deal with that side effect. How much do they affect each other? Good question. Now let's turn this into an equation of 10 drugs. Now what?
I know.
It gets more complicated.
You know, the average number of drugs that someone takes at the age of 65 is 7.
Wow. 7 at 65.
It's typical for me to see in Durham, and it doesn't matter if they come from the indigent care clinic or the high-end clinic. They're on 2 or 3 medicines for high blood pressure. Of course, they have obesity, which needs to be treated and fixes all these things, but most doctors aren't doing that. And then they're on 1 or 2 for diabetes, arthritis, heartburn, 1 or 2, you know.
Wow.
And so I whittle away these medicines as people change their lifestyle.
Deprescribing.
Deprescribing is the term for it, yeah. It's actually pretty fun, but it does take time.
Yeah, it does. And to be fair, not everybody can come off all their drugs. Sometimes it's a combination therapy where keto helps them get off 1 or more drugs. But there's some drugs.
So when someone asks, will I be able to get off? I'll say, let's find out.
Which is the right answer, right?
Yeah. So I don't guarantee, but I do pitch it like a drug that's been studied and been out there a long time, and it will work if you do it. Actually, that might need a study in and of itself. You randomize people to someone who says this will work, and then someone else who says, you might want to try this diet. We'll see.
We could take a break, or how are you doing?
Good. Yeah, let's take a break.
Let's take a break.
If you don't make it to the clinic, this is just an example of what I hand out. And then handout of, I have people old school fill in these forms.
Oh, you have some wonky name, don't you, for your ex? What's your handle on Twitter?
I think it's at Dr.
Dr.
Eric. I can find it.
Oh, I got you. All right.
At Dr. Westman. Yeah.
Gotcha. Just tagged you.
Dr. Eric Westman.
Yep.
And then my follow-up, I just have people fill in what they're eating and drinking. Thought you might like to see an example of eggs, sausage, chicken, pork chop, sugar-free ginger ale. Sandwich, meat, veggies, pork rinds. Do you ever have pork rinds?
I have had many a pork rinds. So these papers I'm looking at, just for the camera, they have this interesting tear at the top, right?
It takes their name off, right?
Exactly. you could have darkened it, but you're like, you know what? I'll just rip it out.
Well, even if you darken it, you can kind of see it if someone got handled.
But this is great.
A boiled egg, strip of bacon. So I ask people every time they come back, do you feel well? Are you having any hunger? Are you satisfied with the foods?
Yeah, let me read these real quick. So this is a Keto Medicine Clinic follow-up visit form. So any issues you would like addressed today? And in this person, they said stomach issues, diarrhea sometimes. Do you feel well? Yes. Do you have any hunger? Yes. Or are you having any hunger? Yes. Are you satisfied with the food you are eating? Oh, they didn't answer this one.
Oh, no, that's not a good response.
Yeah. Have you been strict to the diet every day? Choose one. Some days.
Yeah. So there's the hunger, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's hunger.
How would you rate your energy? Choose one. And it's excellent, good, fair, poor. They chose good. Are you having any constipation? Yes, no, but neither is circled. It just says sometimes. Are you having any muscle aches or cramps? Charlie horses. No. Are you having any headaches? No. Are you having any dizziness or lightheadedness upon standing? Yes. And then you have these different, what do you typically eat and drink over the course of the day? There's breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, drinks. I won't go through all the stuff that they're doing, but this is really great because it's just one sheet.
It's quick.
It's quick, and you're basically just getting a check-in. And like in the case of this person, who's anonymized, I'm not spilling the beans. They're, like you said, they're not the, have you been strict on the diet every day? Yes, most days, some days, no, and they've circled some days. So that, you're right, that's a signal that they're working on it. But,
Here's one where there's a strict yes, or most days, and no hunger. That's what I typically see.
Do you feel well? Yes. Are you having any hunger? No. Are you satisfied with the food you're eating? Yes. Have you been strict to the diet every day? Yes. Not most days, just yes.
Yes.
How would you rate your energy? Excellent, good, fair, poor. They rate it good. Constipation, no. Muscle aches or cramps, no. Headaches, no. Are you having a dizziness or lightheadedness? No. And it's funny because compared to the first one, who had all sorts of things that they had listed through all of the various meals, this one's one's like just a few things.
You can kind of tell
2 eggs.
If there's not much on there for the food, they're doing well.
Yeah.
It's like there are people still searching like this, like that filled in every last space on the food area.
Right. Like this. but this one, see, this could be me. Breakfast, 2 eggs. Lunch, chicken or beef patty. Drinks, water, coffee. That's it.
And so I thought you'd be interested in this first visit. This person brought in 3 pages of their medical history. Here are all the books she read.
Oh, wow.
She read all the low-carb books.
Wow.
But couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So
the knowledge is not, just knowing it is not.
It's not everything. Always enough, but it can be enough. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, what is neat though is there's like a recent personal history. It's all these years and everything that's gone throughout. And the very last item is March. Resigned from career to focus on health and family. That sounds good.
Yeah. We teach in obesity medicine that we should listen.
Yeah.
Just listen. And people go away saying, you're the first doctor that ever listened to me talk about obesity. Most are dismissive or they don't know what to do. So they don't know how to have a conversation about it. They might be awkward about it. So anyway, that's kind of a general obesity treatment. Oh, here, this person, I had to go through the Gary Taubes energy in, energy out, the directionality of it was helpful for her. She had all this book learning, but I explained that once you open the fat store, you're going to eat less because you're shrinking. So the fat burning gets you to eat less. That's why we don't restrict calories. And I remember with Gary, I said, why does that matter? Why do I need to explain it this way? And he just said, because it's right.
That sounds exactly like him. It's funny, I say something similar, like with my family members. I say that the fat cells, they want to come out of retirement. Because right now all you're doing is you're not using them. But they're pros. They are actually the professional stager and pacers of fuel. They're really good at it if you give them a chance. But it used to be that fat cells were thought of as just this cold storage. You put stuff in it and then they just kind of like leak it out. But they're a very active endocrine organ. And part of it is reestablishing your relationship with them.
Yeah.
Is to get that flow back.
You know, in kind of the advanced course of treatment using keto or low carb, LCHF, Atkins, South Beach, Protein Power, Banting, they're all very similar. I have a lot of people coming to me who are good fat burners. They're burning fat, they're eating fat, they're keto, they got ketones, rocking ketones in their blood, breath, or urine, and yet they're not losing weight. So I started now teaching that, well, you know, that retirement plan, the fat up there, you're not going to access the fat until you get the energy balance right. Basically until you eat less. And nobody wants to hear that. But turning it upside, it is all about the energy balance. And at first you don't have to count calories, the fat comes out automatically. So I do counsel in the long term, you know, maybe a year or two into it, I have to help you undo the mindless eating, the habit eating, that sort of thing. And even then, you know, we have come through an era where people are worried about, am I getting enough fat? Am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough? I think that should be discussed the other way around, which is, how can I fuel this body with as little as I can to get by? I mean, that would be like if you had an iPhone that you didn't have to charge for a month. This would be a breakthrough.
Right.
But most people who come to me are in other dietary plans. It's you need this, you need to have this, you eat up to a certain amount on the app and all that. And I heard first through some books, I think it was Jason Fung's book about fasting, and I finally tracked down a case from 1973, fasting for 382 days under medical supervision. Yeah. I'm not advocating for this.
No, but this is a famous
tell me
case.
This. I know. Well, so where did the protein come from?
Right.
And you know, so most people say, well, from the muscles. That could be, but you know, still, and that's why we say have some protein every day. But that, you know, the idea of fasting, the idea of eating less over time, I think is kind of a natural progression of all of this healthy eating. You know, older folks generally eat less over time. In fact, you might have a grandparent or a parent who you feel like they're not eating much at all. So it's normal for people who are getting older to eat less. And I don't know that that's such a bad thing. But this gets us outside the weight loss, diabetes reversal. It's more for longevity now. You know, isn't that curious?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a credible case report of someone under medical supervision who is so heavy that he was able to not eat for a year.
But it really is also, you know, I don't know about you, but especially when it comes to weight loss stories, I'm just dumbfounded at the, like, living your whole life, you know, especially into, say, middle age, discovering that late. I am shocked at how many people not only have stories of how exciting that was, but these new activities they just figured they could never do ever in their life. One of my favorite stories working with lean mass hyperresponders is there was a grandfather who exhibited the characteristics, but was talking about how he was excited to be running with his son and his grandson when he thought he was just going to be like stuck inside for the rest of his life. Yeah. And that was heartening to hear because of just how much pride he took.
Thousands of times, because that's the effect you're having. We're having. Yeah.
Well, you're so much more in the public space, literally hitting all of these different, you know, it's not just the clinic work, it's also the YouTube. It's also the book. The book. Did you bring that? Yeah.
Which one?
I saw
Yeah,
that.
this one?
Yeah. Oh no, I guess that's the larger companion.
Yeah, that's
book.
the textbook.
Right.
Yeah. End Your Carb Confusion is the book that Amy Berger and I wrote. And then End Your Carb Confusion, the cookbook, is actually written by a chef who worked in Michelin star restaurants for 20 years. It's actually a really nice companion set, the End Your Carb Confusion book and the End Your Carb Confusion cookbook. But yeah, that's helped a lot of people. The Adapt Your Life Academy is the company we created to allow people to get this information online. And we have courses that open up from time to time. You can go to the website and sign up on a waiting list for the courses. We even have free classes now for people to sign up for, get the information, and then if they want, they can join other classes too.
When did you get that started? That's been around for a while, right?
Yeah. So here I am working on this, in my clinic. The Bulletproof Coffee, all these other. I get this Skype request, and this is back. It was a while back, and this now a friend and business partner just said, hey doc, do you know there's this thing going on in Cape Town? It's called the Banting diet. And it was right where Professor Noakes, Tim Noakes, Prof Noakes, that he's called, was kind of leading the charge there. And I said, no, I didn't know. And anyway, he said, I want to do a company. And so we started making these little bars, and they were popular, especially among the type 1 GRIT, type 1 diabetes folks. But then that thing that happened in 2020, you couldn't ship them out of South Africa. So we pivoted to become a teaching company. And so we created video content, much like watching a class with PowerPoints, and I'm giving lectures about how to do a keto diet. We've asked Mike and Mary Dan Eads to do a lecture series on protein. We had a cancer doctor do a series on cancer nutrition. And so that's adaptyourlifeacademy.com. And so it's the same business relationship, but he could have done anything with his life. He sold a business and decided he wanted to help people, give back and change people's health. And so that's been a great company that's carried forward.
That's just what it's going to take. I mean, you want to talk about changing the paradigm. It's just outreach. Outreach is often the hardest work. It's just having people know. By the way, this also includes doctors. So many of the doctors that we're talking about just don't necessarily know that this is an option that may prove to be useful to their patients. Not all patients, but a number of patients may be improving if they just knew that this was a possibility. And that's useful, especially given how much emergence there is on the new research with metabolic mind and everything that's coming forward. It's a really exciting time.
I think there's been progress in where most doctors were against it. Many are now maybe not pushing it, but they're tolerant of it. So if you get enough practice in a practice area where you share patients, there's an awareness of, oh, well, you see Dr. Westman, okay, I may not agree with all of that, but it's fine. So if we can just get people to don't tell them not to do it, that's the way it has been. That they don't know about it, so they're against it, right? Kind of a professional attitude but I think a lot of doctors are more tolerant of it, which in and of itself is a big shift. I agree.
Yeah, it's definitely, I've seen a lot within the lean mass hyperresponder community, is that there tends to be more and more awareness that's coming forward. It's a fascinating time, because even in cardiology conferences, I've heard secondhand that it comes up more often than I would have thought in presentations and so forth. So it's a process, right? It's just it propagates in and of itself.
When will we get to the head-to-head trials, right? You randomize folks to low-carb or the traditional
Good question.
for diabetes would be Virta kind of already did that. It was non-randomized, but they basically showed that the low-carb diet could reverse most diabetes, and the other control group did not have that. And then that would be one to replicate with different hands. It's not the company doing it. I mean, so here, for years I'd say always look at who funded it, and then I did a study funded by the doctor himself, Dr. Atkins. And then now years pass, and the company Virta funded their own study. Oh my God! So you're going to be critical of the results because the company did it. Well, but that's what it took. It took the company to do it first, and now I think it's ripe for the other mainstream, or NIH or other sorts of avenues of funding to get on board and pick up where they've started it. I'd love to see a heart disease trial. Get people with type 2 diabetes even, they have a little higher risk of recurrent heart attacks, and randomize them. Well, you'd have to have keto, and then you'd have a GLP-1 or one of the shots, because that's a legitimate weight loss treatment now.
Right.
And then the usual care would be, you don't help them with weight loss. You just use medication for cholesterol reduction, for example. Those would not be difficult studies to do. And then we would know there'd probably be several approaches that work.
There's a lot of randomized studies I would love to do. I would love to do a placebo-controlled randomized control trial with ezetimibe in lean mass hyperresponders. It's of the different ways for which they could lower LDL, it seems to be the most tolerated, and therefore the blinding could probably stick, if you will. I suspect, I don't know this for sure, hypothesis, I suspect that doing this with, like, say, statins would be a bit more challenging, because I'll bet the symptoms might be felt more. I don't know. But that's worth noting for the blinding aspect, because what would be interesting to still get the longitudinal CTAs. But again...
And you think there might be added benefit? Or
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm curious to find out.
Yeah.
But you would think this would be a perfect example of a study that if you were a cholesterol-lowering manufacturer, you would, a drug company, you would say, hey, yeah, we would like to see that. I'll bet I couldn't arm twist them into it, because this would be considered such a low-risk population at baseline.
Right. Well, that means you just need a huge sample size, unfortunately.
But we have a huge LDL, ApoB.
Well, that's true.
Like that's
if that's the outcome.
Yeah. See, this is the strange situation we find ourselves in, because you're not going to get a $10 to $100 million trial on healthy people in primary prevention. I want one, right? But
Right.
I mean, real healthy people, not like, say, Jupiter, something where at baseline, there's none of the cardiovascular risk factors. Hey, we have a population that has sky-high LDL and ApoB. This would be a great one that, I may have to talk them into it. I'd say, look, half of you guys are going to have this intervention if you already weren't somebody who was willing to go on the medication. But I think people would do it for the science.
Yeah.
And that would be great data.
Yeah, thinking back to the CT angiograms baseline in a year on the keto diet, has any other diet ever published a paper like that, to your knowledge, where, let's see, 100 people went on a vegan diet and they did a CT angiogram at baseline and they followed them at a year?
No, definitely not longitudinal.
And yet someone can say they can reverse heart disease without this kind of evidence?
Yeah, like you're speaking of, say, Esselstyn and so forth. So
they're using their clinical observations, right?
Yeah. And this is just a challenge in general, is if you have this is why I wanted to do a prospective study. Prospective study is powerful data, because you determine it in advance, you set the criteria in advance, you recruit against it, then you have however many number of people you have, and then you follow them, and then you find out. And if it's longitudinal, it's even better, because you've got the second scans to do the comparisons with. And that's important.
And do most experts agree that that test, the CT angiogram, is a good test to do? I mean,
Yeah.
It seems to me those who are in charge of the CT, they have their own guidelines, and I don't know how well respected they are by the cardiology groups. Do you have a feel for that?
Well, yeah, I would say that I think that there's IVUS, which is intravascular ultrasound, and there's CT angiography. And the catch was that this was a bit more invasive.
Right.
But there was less exposure concerns relative to CT angiogram until recently. CT angiograms technology advancements have really dropped down the dosage a lot. And I think the resolution has improved in the more state-of-the-art machines these days.
So 20 years ago, when I did the first study on the Atkins diet, I took the result, to a prominent cardiologist at Duke. And he said, that's a fibrate. Looks like gemfibrozil. I said, no, it's the Atkins diet, the pattern of change in the lipids. And he said, okay, randomize people to that diet with diabetes and who've had heart disease, and have a control group and follow them for 5 years. You'll have your answer. I'm ready to do that study now. 20 years ago, I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah.
Because the deep prescription that's necessary for the low carb group, if these people have diabetes and they're on insulin, is not trivial. We may have hurt some people by not cutting the insulin enough.
Right.
But I'm ready to do that study, and it wouldn't be such a huge one if you have a relatively high risk of outcomes. So you have the best medication care versus the, so outcomes, but why not do CT angiography? But so now, in your experience, I guess I should talk to Dr. Budoff about it. If you have someone with existing disease and you follow them, with like a lot of lesions, is it still pretty reproducible and reliable test as a surrogate for death and dying in heart attack?
Well, it's highly correlative. If you're talking about the progression of plaque, for example, with cardiovascular disease outcome, like that's already well established in literature. And I like it because you don't have to get to events. You don't have to wait until there's if you're looking at a population that is advancing rapidly towards disease, you'd rather catch that earlier rather than at the point at which there's enough events powering to demonstrate it in real time, right?
Well, and it may not work at that late time, and it may work or help earlier. So, but generally, if you power calculations, if you have a higher event rate, you need fewer people. So that's why the idea of having people with lots of events, I mean, it sounds morbid and macabre. But
that's statistics, right?
Yeah,
you've got to have. This is why I keep bringing it back to, if people want to say our study with 100 lean mass hyperresponders is too small, I would say it's not. If we're getting back to Brown and Goldstein, if we're talking magnitude of the exposure of interest, the exposure of interest is gigantic. Our average at 254 milligrams per deciliter is in the top 10% of the top 1%. It's sky high.
Yeah.
And by the second scan, 5.7 years on it. We well exceed what Brown and Goldstein were looking at when they were experiencing symptoms sooner. And again, this is not to, as you know, I'll always level set to say, we don't know what we don't know. We're going to get more data. As of right now, though, the data that we have, massively novel. I think we have all kinds of great information, great data that's come out of this. And
I would say revolutionary.
I'll let you say that.
Earth-shaking.
Yes.
Unexpected.
Yeah. But, I have to...
the others, it's unexpected.
True. To the others, they'll say, this is just one study. And by the way, that's not entirely wrong. We need to do more studies. We need to continue to reproduce. I joke about this sometimes, but not entirely a joke. If I ever write a book, I may want to call it Gratitudeonomics, because I would say that I've gotten so much mileage out of making these things happen by thanking people like you, Eric, who lend the hand, who keep putting in the work, who do the mentions, who do the retweets and so forth. This is only possible in the age of the internet.
Yeah.
And genuine goodwill, genuinely people going, I really think we should make this happen together. And here we are. I mean, it's just Monday. You and I have been chatting about this for years. And quite literally, we crossed the biggest line just now, 5 days ago. It's crazy.
There'll always be another hurdle, though.
There will be,
that's just research.
But I'm glad to have that one in the rearview mirror.
Well, but how great would it be if a novel or a young buck researcher who wants to rabble-rouse a little bit, study some people who have high LDLs or at least case studies of just pushing this forward a little bit. I think there may be some. In the cardiology and lipidology world, there are those who are always thinking triglyceride and HDL. That's that gemfibrozil, and I know there's some tension in there, but I don't know how funded they are.
Yeah.
Or you find someone like me 25 years ago who's just kind of ignorant of the whole thing, and you haplessly get into the area and follow the data. I mean, and that's what I've loved about your approach, is that you're initially with your own self-experimentation and now advancing that. Well, you had a little study at a meeting, even had people follow a protocol,
right.
and
I just remembered
together.
You were there.
Yeah.
That was arguably the first time I involved people outside of, say, my sister for the second run. That was at Keto Fest.
Yeah.
2017.
New London, Connecticut.
And what was great about that, just to kind of set up for people, Carl Franklin and Richard
Morris.
Richard Morris. They are the two keto dudes. They had a podcast going forever, and they wanted to set up this keto conference, but that was a different kind of a conference. And so it's Keto Fest. So it was actually quite an experience, and props to them for putting it together. You and I were speakers there, but I wanted to run this experiment. I wanted to just do something that was more than just myself. And at that time, the only other person I got to do it with me was my sister. And so at that conference, knowing it was coming, I had partnered with PTS Diagnostics, who have a cholesterol test that's like a home test where you can actually get your cholesterol there, where we would also be collecting blood samples for LabCorp and Quest at the same time. So we were getting 3 different variations of cholesterol testing, and got 22 volunteers, I want to say. So we were there, getting our blood drawn.
So they followed the protocol before coming to town.
Right. They for the 3 days before the Friday that it started, everybody could either fast or be hypocaloric, as in consuming less. Then we'd all get our blood work. And then for the 3 days following, which is appropriate because it's Keto Fest, eat as much as you want, as much fat as you want, as long as it remains keto. You have to stay at a ketogenic ratio. So boom, Friday, all of day Saturday, all of day Sunday, and then we all got our blood work on the Monday following. And the Feldman protocol, as it was known then, would predict that we would see a pronounced drop in LDL cholesterol, and that's what happened.
By eating more fat.
Right, by eating more fat. That's what happened in 19 of the 22. Only 3 saw an increase. The other 19 saw a drop, and a substantial drop overall. And that initial pattern is what's incorporated into what is now published. The lipid energy model is published as of 3 years ago, and it's very predictive. And it's interesting because a lot of people were using this protocol to, for example, get around in life insurance. If it was concerned about your LDL cholesterol, because they assume that it takes forever for cholesterol to change. More people are becoming savvy, going, no, actually, I can do what Dave has done, what Siobhan has done, and so forth, and just do this protocol. And so they just consume a lot, and their cholesterol would go way down, and then get the blood test. And, because there's no rules against that. It worked. But at the same time, I was starting to get concerned that people were kind of instructing others to do it when, just about anything you do that's going to be heavy, you want to do and, consult. You want to consult your doctor before you do experiments at these scales.
You don't need a doctor to change your food.
That's true.
but this is powerful. So if you're on medicine, you certainly want to do it with someone who knows how to get you off the medicine.
And I'll concede. I mean, to some degree, I think I've built in this muscle, this mental muscle that sort of kicks in whenever I'm trying to describe something that I don't want people to take as advice, especially medical advice, right? Which I think is to err on the side of being overly qualifying than not.
Of course.
But at the same time, it is a challenge because I do miss, Eric, I miss those earlier days where I could just experiment and just share it with the world. But I didn't have that high of a profile. I had like a few hundred people that followed me or something like that. So talking theory all day long was no big deal. Now,
interesting.
I'm sure you experienced this to some degree. You're a little bit more aware when your profile is much higher about being misinterpreted. Not even necessarily for nefarious reasons, but for the best of reasons.
Yeah, the Church of LDL is far and wide, and you don't want to say there's no God no LDL in the Church of LDL too loudly. Well, so that idea of lowering the LDL over a few day period because insurance companies check the LDL, and if it's high, what is the insurance more expensive or or you can't even get it,
or you might not even be able to get it at all.
And where does that come from? I've tried to probe. Are you using your own actuarial data? These companies are they getting advice from doctors?
I think it's a combination of the two. I've actually asked insurance companies about this before, and they would say that there's a component for which they're convinced by the existing science that has been presented to them by their partner physicians or employees and so forth.
But they could check it or confirm it or refute it with their own data if they're checking it. Unless they're just using it as a in or out, and then they don't ever do any analyses based on it. That could be what's going on. One of the things I didn't really think I would get into ever is the idea that there are only a few companies that care if you live or die. And I kind of naively thought it was healthcare companies care, right? Well, not really. As you said, it's not wellness, it's sick care. So the health insurance actually just kind of passes along the dollar, if you will. Life insurance companies should care that you live longer because they get your premium and then they pay out when you die, right? Well, but actually, I don't know that they do. It's the reinsurance company. And I didn't realize that life insurance companies have insurance. And so when Swiss Re started putting on conferences, and John Schoenby is kind of this enlightened guy who said, people aren't living as long. And we anticipated that people would live longer and life insurance would do better. And so the reinsurance companies are the ones kind of interested in this because diabetes is not something you want to have to live longer. It shortens the life. And I first saw that at a meeting that Prof. Noakes put on in Cape Town. It was funded by the life insurance company, and then Swiss Re put on the conference in Geneva for a few years. But if you think about it, there are very few drug companies don't care if you live longer, or I suppose you would take their medicine longer, or food companies. I don't think they think in that way of they're making enough money. I don't know.
I think it's less the darker way to understand this is that there'd be an interest in keeping you sick intentionally for longer and neither getting healthy or dying. Like that would be kind of but I think it's less that dynamic, that mechanism of a misaligned incentive than it is, this is where the attention can be now applied. So it's really more, we're not watching for how you stop from getting here. We're just more and more spending all of our money on what to do when you do. So when you get to this place of deep sickness, oh, here's this other frontier of deep sickness over here. Let's see what we can do about that. Let's see what we can do about this. There's just not good business models in keeping people healthy that don't require a lot of money from them. That's just the reality of it. And I will say that I do like how in Europe, I suppose there's pros and cons to this, but a lot of countries that we've been to, they don't have annual physicals or things along those lines. You often just don't go to the doctor until there's a problem. Now, from a data standpoint, that's kind of bugged me a little bit because I really would love annualized data so that you could see things like lipid trajectories. That would be very interesting to me. But by the same token, I have wondered about that. If there isn't a degree of overtreatment that we get as Americans when we're going to the doctor all the time, something gets out of reference range, hey, there's a thing we can give you to bring it back into reference range. Just stay on this until who knows, right? And it could be that thing that was out of reference range, given the experiments that I've done, was actually just on that Thursday. And it was going to get back into reference range the day after. But getting a doctor's appointment, getting your blood work done, that's all a huge hassle. And so all that's happening is people are operating on the snapshot over and over again. And I think, by the way, this is where I get especially frustrated, is that they changed it to where it used to be you would get your blood work fasted. That was like standard. And they've changed it to where now you can get, you'll be there for the afternoon at the doctor's office and they'll go, oh, let's get your blood work while it's now. Well, in the case of people who are low carb, that's a huge deal, because it's very likely your triglycerides are going to be through the roof if you ate a few hours earlier, because you're powered by fat. You literally brought them in. And so oftentimes people come into the groups and say, I don't understand. My triglycerides are like 240. What happened? And the first question everyone asks, rightly,
was it fasted?
Was it fasted?
Yeah.
Because if it's not fasted, if you're on a low-carb diet, especially if you're a very low-carb diet, especially if it's keto, I fully expect that you're going to have relatively higher triglycerides than you normally would have in the morning, especially postprandial, especially after meals. And given the low basal insulin, that wouldn't surprise me. Now, if you're on a mixed diet, if you had higher basal insulin levels, well, the insulin is part of what turns that lipoprotein lipase wheel, and will therefore end up, removing more of those triglycerides from circulation. But there's no data that if you're metabolically healthy and your triglycerides are higher due to being low carb, that is necessarily detrimental. I'm not saying I know for sure it isn't. I'm just saying it makes physiological sense why that's the case when your environment is low insulin overall.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure would be nice to have 10 people measured, in real time on a keto diet, eating different things, seeing how all of these things change. I remember some years ago there was a metabolic chamber study funded by NUSI. That was Gary Taubes and Peter Attia at the moment. Did a study where people went into a metabolic chamber and essentially they proved that their metabolic rate was different, even though the abstract was written in a way that kind of covered it all up. It was a weird thing that happened, but there are metabolic chambers that people can use to describe all of these things. Add on the lipid component to it, or even there could be a lipid group that says this model is the straw man and they should refute it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you can come up with some proof that it's not true, at least that would advance the knowledge of it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I wish that there was more of an interest in negative findings, period. Just as far as science goes, it's a no-brainer is no-brainer to me. Is you want to have the you want to be able to confirm and disconfirm. And the challenge right now in the world of science is that positive, and again, this is not just me, there's plenty of people who've weighed in on this. Too much of the motivation of journals is to publish results that are novel and changing something or that supports something that's novel. But very rarely is there as much of an interest in something that's completely reproduced but negative by the same token. And there's a great podcast series. Its name is eluding me, but it had 6 episodes, and this was like there was an episode that was devoted to this that put it so well. I got to find that one. Maybe I'll post it in the show notes of this show. But
yeah, file drawer bias is the term for if you just never publish something. That even in the low carb world or the low fat world, there was a study that was done and they never published it, right? And the family member found it in the basement of the person who was the investigator.
Hart study, right? Is that the one? Yeah. It was the one that actually was a fairly strong effort towards randomized. It was double blinded and randomized, and if I'm not mistaken, it was in a facility, might have been a mental health facility or something to that effect. And there really was a very effective effort at being able to have it, but they didn't publish all the results, and the results were later found in a basement.
Yeah. And when asked, they said, well, the results didn't come out the way we wanted them to. Oh, no.
Yeah, that's the other piece of this is I wish that there was more of a commitment in advance that gets, I think I talked to Gary Taubes about this. And again, this isn't my idea. This is just what makes a lot of sense. There should be a commitment with a journal before the study gets underway for them to publish whatever the results are. So they can weigh in, and they may want to, on the design value, right, of the study, whatever it's doing. Say, hey, we like this methodology, we don't like this methodology, but whatever it is, lock it in. And you know what? You'll save a whole lot of work on what that ends up being.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, whatever ends up happening, that's what ends up getting published.
I think the clinical trial registry came about for one of the reasons is that you couldn't just do a study and then not have it just go away. So that you guys registered when you were starting the study there's a national database of clinical trials, and you have a number but it doesn't mean you're going to publish the result. It's just that someone could sleuth out, well, what happened to that? What happened to that study? Oh, it didn't come out the way we wanted.
And I think it's like half of the studies registered there. I mean, it's a large number. It should be less than 5%, frankly, if it's been years and years and years. But of the ones that have been registered there, there's a sizable fraction that have never either didn't complete or didn't report their findings or something. I don't know. But I think it's worth noting. I think I'm ready for a steak. How about you?
Okay.
Where can people find you, Eric?
Well, my Duke practice is at Duke, and you can go to
So go to Duke.
Go to Duke.
Meet Eric.
I'm afraid there's a little bit of a waiting list, however. So in order to help people who can't make it to Duke, I created a company called Adapt Your Life Academy. So you can go to www.adaptyourlifeacademy.com, sign up for a class. You'll learn from me and my staff the information that we've learned and try to help you change your life for the better and really have amazing results. And I've learned not to worry so much about the LDL. I mean, ApoB.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. And
my pleasure.
I think, actually, was about to say one more thing, but I'll wait for that last part on offline. Anyway, thanks once again for coming.
My pleasure.